Hello and welcome to the Megacast by Actual Tech Media. Today's event is all about enhancing data protection, disaster recovery as a service, and disaster recovery capabilities. On this event, you'll hear from experts at Druva, Unisys, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Zerto, TierPoint, Progress, and Faction. What an amazing lineup. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule in the world of IT to join us on this Megacast event. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the event. We at Actual Tech Media created the Megacast and EcoCast event series to help educate IT professionals about the latest and greatest in enterprise technology. We want to help you to get all your questions answered. We're all former IT professionals ourselves at Actual Tech Media, and we know how tough it can be in enterprise tech. So we want to help to solve your technology challenges through these events and through these innovative technology solutions. Now, before we get started, just a few things that you should know. This is a Megacast, and I'd like to say that we have a mega lineup of prizes on these events. I'll be talking about those prizes in just a moment. Questions. We have the questions tab. It's there in your audience console. I encourage you to use that to ask your questions, get those questions in early. We will be doing a best question prize for each of the sessions on the event today. I'll talk about that in just a moment. I appreciate all the good morning and hello messages from across the United States and around the world, but we also want your technical questions about today's topic. We want this to be a social event as well. You can tweet directly from your console, and the hashtag for today's event will be automatically appended. And finally, resources. In your handouts tab, you'll find a number of PDF assets, ebooks, and links. I encourage you to check those out before the event ends because they won't be as easily accessible after the Megacast. Now, on the event today, man, I wish I had one of these. We're giving out 5 DJI Mavic Air 2 drones. That's right, 5 DJI drones. These are some of the best drones in the world today. So congratulations to anyone in advance who wins one of these, as well as an Amazon $500 gift card after every presentation on the event today. With 6 presentations, that's 6 gift cards. The prize terms and conditions can be found in your audience console, with the primary condition being you must be live in attendance to qualify. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. Winners have the option to make a donation to selected charities as well. And new for 2021, we have our best question prize for a $50 Amazon gift card. And this isn't one prize for the entire event. This is one prize for each session. So with 6 sessions, that's 6 Amazon $50 gift cards. So like I said, get your questions in early. Now, through generous prize winners such as yourselves, we have donated thousands of dollars to charities over the years through doing these events. If you win a prize on the event today and you'd like to donate that prize value to charity, we would love to help you do that. Now, we also partner with the Gorilla Guide Book Club. You can download free educational, full-length, high-quality books via the gorilla.guide website. You can also find that in your handouts tab. Now, the hashtag for today's event on Twitter is ATM Megacast. You can follow Actual Tech Media on Twitter and me, David M. Davis, as well. Feel free to subscribe to all the Actual Tech Media social channels, YouTube, Facebook, and our 10 on Tech podcast over in the iTunes store. And oh yeah, we post all of our latest and greatest content on LinkedIn, so make sure that you follow us there as well. Now, before we jump into a few poll questions and I introduce you to our first presenter on the Megacast, I ask you to stop for a moment, think about your disaster recovery plan. What does it look like today? If you had an earthquake, a tornado, a fire, a flood, whatever it might be, right now, today, I hope it doesn't happen, but if you did, what would your disaster recovery plan look like? Would it work? Are you confident of it? When's the last time you tested the plan? When's the last time you tested your backups? And not just recovering an individual file or an individual virtual machine or an individual database, but what about if you needed to recover everything? These ransomware attacks that are happening, these companies have to do mass restores. And in many cases, while they have their data backed up and they can restore it, they haven't ever tested a mass restore. And the time that it takes to perform a mass restore, unfortunately, they discover in some cases is weeks or a month. And then unfortunately, they end up having to pay the ransom. So take a moment and think about your disaster recovery plan because it's a scary time for you and your company's data. We all have massively growing data sets. Our data is being distributed across mobile, across software as a service applications, across multiple data centers, public clouds, laptops. Our data is everywhere. It's not just in one place in the data center anymore that you can walk in there and put a hand on. Your company's data is everywhere, and it's your job to protect it. Unfortunately, it's being attacked and sold. And even if you can recover your data after a ransomware attack, in many cases, companies are being blackmailed. And even employee personal data is being sold, and employees are being blackmailed. So it's a scary time for us in IT. So not only do you need data protection and disaster recovery, you also need strong security. Now, thankfully, cloud is a great innovation that has helped us to make this easier than it used to be in the past. With utility-based pricing models, we might only have to pay to store our data each month, and then an additional charge when we need to perform testing or actually spin up our DR site in the cloud. Cloud offers infinite scalability for disaster recovery. It's elastic. You can spin it up, bring it back down. It's DR on demand, push button DR in many cases. There are pre-built cloud DR solutions, and they can be automated. I really like how disaster recovery as a service can make disaster recovery easier. But whether or not you choose to use cloud for your data protection and DR, you need to make sure that you have a solution for backup and recovery that's high performance, that can scale up to the size of your data set because the data just never seems to stop scaling. Make sure that it's affordable for your company, that you can test it easily, and that it's going to make your job easier when it comes to disaster recovery. And finally, don't forget solid support. Make sure that the support is going to be there when you need it. And with all that in mind, I'm excited to hear from some of the most innovative technology companies in the world today to learn about how they can help you in the real world to enhance your data protection and disaster recovery capabilities. Now, before I introduce you to our first presenter, I've got a few poll questions for you.
All right, I've just brought up the first poll question on the screen. We've got some new poll questions here, hopefully some fun poll questions. This one's a simple yes or no. Is backup to tape dead? I want to hear your response to this one, and I will share the results with you, and you can see, how your opinions stack up with others, other IT professionals on this event today. So if you haven't answered these polls before, you just do it right there in the slides window, simple yes or no. All right, thank you everyone who responded to that poll. Let me share the results with you now. And a relatively even split there, actually. 53% say yes, backup to tape is dead, and 46% said no, it's not. Tape still has some life left in it. So very interesting feedback. Thank you for that. I wasn't sure, honestly, if it was going to be heavily weighted one way or the other. For anyone out there who doesn't see the poll question or the poll results, try a refresh on your web browser, and Chrome is the recommended web browser. All right, next poll question on the screen. Which is more important to your organization, RPO or RTO? So recovery point objective, which is related to how much data are you willing to lose, and recovery time objective, which is how quickly are you going to get back up and running? And unfortunately, you can't select them both. Sorry, it's a single select question. I know it could be tough, but pick one. What's most important to you? All right, thank you to everyone who responded to that one. Let me share the results of this with you. And so 59% said RTO is more important to them and their company. So getting things back up as quickly, as rapidly as possible, very, very little downtime, almost no downtime, is more critical than, exactly the amount of data that's going to be lost in the recovery process. Of course, I'm sure at some point, you don't want to lose too much data, but very interesting feedback. Thank you for that. And then let's see, here's another fun question. Do you back up and recover from a single cloud or multiple clouds. Of course, this assumes that you're using cloud of some kind for your data protection and DR. If you're not, then you don't have to answer this one. No worries. But if you are using cloud-based data protection in some shape or form, the question here is, do you just use a single cloud or multiple clouds? And then after this, we've got one more poll question, and then I'll be introducing you to our first presenters. Thank you to all the excellent comments and feedback out there from everyone, all the good morning questions. I love seeing all the greetings and hello messages from everywhere across the United States and around the world. It's really fun and really inspiring. I try to respond to every one of these, so I do appreciate them. Thank you. All right, thank you to everyone who responded to that. Let me share the results now. And it looks like 63% said they're using a single cloud, followed by 36% who are using multiple clouds for data protection. Good to know. All right, final poll question. If you're on the event today, it's likely you're learning about new solutions that you might be implementing at your company at some point in the future. So the question here is, what's your time frame for adding new or updating existing IT solutions at your company, specifically around data protection and disaster recovery? All right, thank you everyone who responded to that question. We do appreciate it. It's now time to kick off the Megacast. I'm excited to introduce Jenna Colleran, Storage Product Marketing Manager, and Ashwin Shetty, Product Marketing Manager at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Ashwin and Jenna, thanks for being here. Take it away.
My name is Ashwin Shetty, and I work in HP's product marketing team, looking after data protection solution. I'm also joined by my colleague Jenna from the product marketing team, who looks after the hybrid cloud solutions. We'll spend the next 20 minutes talking through how HP has been helping customers modernize their data protection and disaster recovery by simplifying how they safeguard and make the most out of their data. Now more than ever, data is the lifeblood of any organization, and any incidents of data loss or application unavailability can take a significant toll on that business. With the recent rise in cyber attacks and exponential data growth, protecting data has become the #1 job for many IT organizations. Customers keep asking these three questions. How can I simplify my operations to be able to make it easier to protect my data across every SLA? How do I align my infrastructure to actual use so I'm able to manage cash flow? And how do I transform that protected data into an asset, whereas in the past, backup data was just an insurance policy? Data protection solutions today are faced with three key challenges. First, there is too much time spent managing infrastructure and policies to meet SLAs. You have needs for rapid recovery on premises. You want to be able to have cost-effective long-term retention as well, but there is a lot of infrastructure to manage and deploy. If you were to buy a traditional backup appliance, you will need to initialize the system, load balance across drives, and worry about how you're going to scale it. There's a ton of manual intervention, and IT has to have a dedicated backup admin to support that environment. The second aspect is wasted resources. Oftentimes, there's an inability to effectively plan and scale infrastructure needs, resulting in over provisioning and underutilized resources. The third dimension is that data protection is just an insurance because you're locking that data away and not leveraging that data. But in reality, you want to be able to extract value from that data. You want to be able to use the data for other purposes like test and development, reporting, or analytics. But you can't because data is locked away in a backup appliance, stuck on premises, limiting its usefulness. Traditional backup appliances are not designed for today's dynamic and distributed business environment. They're time consuming and costly to manage. They can't scale easily to meet the dynamic needs. They need upfront capex, expensive software licensing, and costly over provisioning. And they lock your data away only to be used in case of an emergency. So, is moving to the cloud the answer? In the quest to be more agile, to be more innovative, backup infrastructure needs to be transformed from something you have to manage to something that manages itself. This is an opportunity for the cloud. Cloud for backup isn't a new concept, but the cloud solution for backup today aren't doing enough. Across a myriad of different approaches, they are still complex, requiring bolt on gateways and virtual appliances that still need to be managed in the cloud. They can be still painful, invoking disruptions and change as they require you to rip and replace your existing backup software and policies. And they're still just an insurance limiting how you restore and use your data. Now it's the time to modernize data protection so you can easily protect your data and extract value and insights from it. By taking a more modern approach, you don't have to choose between cost effective operations and agile, scalable data protection. A strategy that thoughtfully augments your legacy infrastructure with new, more nimble technology which can help to reduce complexity, cost, and risk while accelerating your organization's time to value. To help in your journey to modernize your data protection, we have cloud services for data protection through HP GreenLake, enabling protection and recovery of data on premises, at the edge, or in the cloud. You can deploy HP Cloud Services from rapid recovery to long-term retention, either locally, which is on premises, or in the cloud, depending upon your business requirement. The notion of cloud services is important because it applies to both the concept of on-premises as well as true enterprise cloud. The first service is an on premises backup service. You will have the ability on premises to have rapid recovery with cloud consumption and elastic scaling. Through HP GreenLake, you can order, monitor, and scale on demand. HP Storewants, which is a pre configured platform that allows you to deploy HP Storewants within your on premises environment. This is a true pay as you protect business model where you're paying for the consumption based on how you use it. The scaling is elastic, where you can easily log onto the HP GreenLake Central portal and get that additional capacity on demand. This is a true cloud model on premises backed by HP Storewants. It's a secure, efficient backup, giving you the ability to have faster RTOs and RPOs. To modernize data protection in the cloud, HP Cloud Volumes Backup and Enterprise Cloud Backup Solution Service delivers a simple, efficient, and flexible way to store backup data. This on demand service lets customers back up seamlessly to the cloud from any primary storage array. It's effortless as customers can spin up storage capacity in minutes and direct it to existing data workflows in just a few clicks. Automated backup policies eliminate having to initialize, configure, and manage or tune physical or virtual infrastructure. The enterprise cloud backup service also breaks down silos of a typical cloud backup deployment. HP Cloud Volumes Backup unifies backup in the cloud, removing mass fragmentation with open support for any primary storage array and any data protection software like Veeam, Commvault, Veritas, Microfocus, and others. This data protection service also eliminates complexity by freeing customers from the day-to-day hassles and operation cost of the backup infrastructure with consumption-based pricing and efficient data mobility. And finally, it's flexible. Customers can restore workloads on premises or easily leverage public clouds for multiple use cases such as test and development, reporting, analytics, enabling them to transform backup data into a business asset. While alternative cloud backup service exist, HP Cloud Volumes Backup is unique and drives significantly more value for organizations. It unifies backup data in the cloud by providing customers the ability to collapse mass fragmentation with open support for any primary storage and any data protection software and application. The backup data is reactivated because this service allows customers easily and effortlessly activate and reuse secondary data for test and development and analytics in multiple public clouds to data insights. There are no egress charges, no fees to restore data from the cloud in contrast to other cloud service providers. It has an open cloud ecosystem that's no cloud lock-in, providing customers the flexibility to recover on premises or in the cloud. And it provides resilient protection from cyber attacks. It makes backup images invisible and inaccessible to ransomware threats, ensuring data integrity and enabling restores in case of an attack. It also delivers faster backup and recovery. It reduces the time, cost, and network bandwidth for cloud backup and recovery by 20 times due to the highly efficient source size deduplication, change block tracking, and advanced compression. HP Cloud Volumes Backup Service ushers in a new era in protecting data in the cloud. Now let's focus on disaster recovery strategies. Whether you're hit by a natural disaster, hardware failure, data breach, or ransomware attack, you need to recover your data quickly and painlessly. As the importance and value of data grows, being ready to protect and recover that data is more vital than ever. You need your data back quickly and with as little disruption as possible. Your disaster recovery readiness needs to be flexible, allowing you to recover data, application, and virtual machines from any platform, efficient by aligning recovery point and time objectives easily with SLAs, simple with fast recovery through a single scalable solution, and finally versatile to protect data against all kinds of threats. It's not enough to simply have a stock disaster recovery plan. Modern disaster recovery must be planned within the larger business continuity plans of an organization. It requires new tools and procedures to effectively plan and respond. The three goals should be to reduce your disaster recovery cost, that is, to build multiple disaster recovery tiers to more effectively meet your SLS, allocate your data based on business value, RTOs and RPO requirement, and support offset backups. Number two is recover your data wherever it is. Making sure your mission critical data is accounted for and accessible is crucial to disaster recovery. You should be able to recover on premises, in the cloud, from the cloud, or between the clouds. And finally, you need to avoid vendor lock in and typical cost drivers. Disaster recovery to a certain facility or hardware or hypervisor can drive up the cost. You need the flexibility to recover workloads from on premises or multiple cloud locations. When it comes to disaster recovery, enterprises need to meet their SLAs, but they want the flexibility for the right recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives, and want a simpler experience, everything from managing replication to infrastructure. Mission critical apps demand no downtime. So, in event of a site failure, you need synchronous replication with transparent application failover, asynchronous replication on premises for global distances, and even asynchronous replication out to the cloud. Let's look at HP Primera. HP Primera made waves in the industry when it launched with a 100% data availability guarantee with no strings attached. This is available for every customer and every array with just a standard support. To protect against site-wide disaster, we built upon that with peer persistent and asynchronous replication. And now we have also added three-side replication for peer persistence and faster asynchronous with near instant replication with a 1 minute RPO. The key takeaway being is it's a robust disaster recovery portfolio on HP Primera to address all mission critical environments. And it's very simple to set up. And the best part is it's all free with an all inclusive software. I'll now turn it over to Jenna for the hybrid cloud section.
Thanks, Ashwin. I'm going to come on now and talk about some disaster recovery solutions for hybrid cloud. So, starting off talking about how cloud is a journey. Many organizations today have adopted a cloud first strategy, a strategy aimed to take advantage of the agility and self service on demand infrastructure, the elasticity to scale and pay based on actual use. But the public cloud is not a one size fits all. While this strategy works well for born in the cloud applications designed for the distributed infrastructure and platform services of the public cloud, they're not suitable for mission critical applications. For these applications and databases, organizations rely on data services, 6 nines or more resiliency, and low latency performance of on-premises storage and data gravity and application refactoring for the cloud make this cloud-first strategy implausible for your core business applications. That's why our approach is to bring our customers a cloud everywhere strategy, a strategy that delivers a unified experience with the same simple, agile cloud consumption across on-prem and public cloud, multi-cloud flexibility with enterprise data services running on premises and in the cloud, with fluid data mobility to seamlessly move data where it needs to be, while maximizing IT agility to unlock innovation across every cloud. Despite the benefits of this approach, there still are some challenges. In most cases where both public and private clouds are deployed, they have to be managed separately, and the different policies, APIs, and portals make that extremely difficult for your IT team. This challenge is worsened by cloud lock-ins that restrict your usage of public cloud resources, inconsistent data services that require application refactoring, and the inability to move data across clouds keep your data stuck. Plus, organizations are forced to pay costly egress fees to restore their data. So going back, let's look at what Cloud Everywhere could do for you. If you think about the benefits of Cloud Everywhere, it's important to think about it from the lens of your application and data in their lifecycle. On-premises and cloud are optimized for different aspects of this lifecycle, from development and test, production, analytics, all the way to data protection. With easy data mobility, you can unlock all the uses to get the best of both worlds. So for example, perhaps you want to start test dev in the cloud, and then when your application moves to production, you can drive better cost control by moving the application on premises. Or say you have an application that was born in the cloud, you can bring the same cloud experience on-prem. And as your organization then looks to analytics and garnering insights, you can replicate your on-prem data to the cloud with open and direct access to the computing power for every cloud for analytics. And then lastly, as Ashwin mentioned in the previous section, you should be able to extend data protection to the cloud. We're looking at with Cloud Everywhere, we want to optimize each stage of the lifecycle, and you should be able to move your data where it needs to be and where it makes the most sense for your business. So how do you get Cloud Everywhere? We think there are 3 key ingredients that you need to overcome the challenges I previously outlined to realize the path to Cloud Everywhere. It first starts with having an on-premises cloud that delivers agility without compromise to your mission-critical applications. This requires having the right foundation with the simplicity of consumption, the flexibility to support any application, and the elasticity to scale on demand. Secondly, it requires seamless data mobility that bridges every cloud to eliminate the silos and lock-in that exist in the public cloud today. Mobility that moves data where it needs to be along its lifecycle to maximize developer agility and innovation, cost control for production, limitless compute for analytics, and cost-effective data protection. And lastly, customers need enterprise cloud data services that unifies the data experience, bringing the same advanced data services expected for your mission-critical applications on premises, but out to the cloud. So introducing, well, for the second time, as Ashwin introduced Cloud Volumes Backup, but it's part of this suite. So Cloud Volumes is a suite of enterprise cloud data services, including Cloud Volumes Block and Cloud Volumes Backup, that frees data for hybrid cloud. It enables Cloud Everywhere, bringing customers a unified experience that bridges clouds to maximize agility and innovation. So starting out with Cloud Volumes Block, it's an enterprise-grade multi-cloud data service for storing, protecting, and managing data. Customers can effortlessly, securely, and efficiently replicate data from Nimble Storage and Nimble Storage DHCI to Cloud Volumes Block. This data is available to use in events of disasters. It can efficiently and easily be recovered either back on premises or from any major public cloud provider with simplicity, automation, security, and low latency, thereby leveraging compute resources to run analytics, testing, reporting, etc. This gives customers an easy data protection solution with the flexibility to use their data for further innovation in an elastic and agile way. So just a quick recap of HPE Cloud Volumes Backup. As Ashwin mentioned, it enables customers to easily move their backup infrastructure to the cloud directly from any storage array or backup ISV without changing existing workflows. It eliminates complexities by freeing customers from the day-to-day hassles and costs of backup infrastructure. It provides peace of mind that data is rapidly recoverable and always secure. It optimizes costs with consumption-based pricing and ultra-efficient data mobility across any hybrid cloud. And it empowers customers to get more mileage out of their backup data, enabling them to transform their backup data to accelerate development and reveal new business insights. So just taking a quicker look at HPE Cloud Volumes Block service. It's delivered completely as a service with built-in data mobility between your on-premises arrays in our cloud-adjacent service. By doing so, we immediately address the data gravity problem that I outlined previously. You can take your data to the cloud for workload migration, pipelines, analytics, or disaster recovery in one simple step. You're also able to gain the flexibility of choosing the right cloud for your needs with HPE Cloud Volumes Block. You're able to do this by presenting your data to compute in Azure, Google, or AWS immediately without the hassle of migration. Cloud Volumes Block brings all the enterprise storage features you leverage on premises to the cloud, from rapid cloning and restores, snapshots, to enterprise-grade availability. And unlike other cloud offerings, we don't expect you to manage an array in the cloud. HPE Cloud Volumes Block is 100% cloud-based and delivered as a service, so you are free from administration and empowered to innovate. So with no lock-in, free data mobility, and complete visibility, HPE Cloud Volumes Block delivers the perfect cloud storage platform for these hybrid cloud requirements. So going back to the hybrid cloud disaster recovery, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we pay this off with the Nimble storage and cloud volumes. So as a quick refresher, HPE Nimble Storage is a proven enterprise platform with 6 nines measured availability across its entire installed base. We've had peer persistence and async replication across 2 sites, and now we've extended disaster recovery to 3 sites for that extra level of protection from metro-wide disasters. The key point here is that HPE Nimble replication is simple to configure in just a few clicks, as it's built into the Nimble OS, and that third site can also include the cloud through Cloud Volumes Block. This is particularly valuable as it lets customers use that data for more than just insurance, as Cloud Volumes can access all the public clouds, as I previously described. So I'd like to hand it back over to Ashwin as he's going to talk about backup as a service, both on premises and in the cloud.
Thanks, Jenna. With HP Store Once delivered as backup service along with HP Cloud Volumes Backup, we are providing customers end-to-end data protection as a service. This is a huge differentiator as there is no other vendor in the industry which can offer end-to-end on-premises and cloud data protection as a service, and that is easily consumable through a point-and-click experience. These services are designed to make protection effortless. It's about transforming your data protection from a capex to a as a service model, and it also helps you to unlock the value of your data. And, and if we elevate this further and look at this from a HP standpoint overall, this is about providing data protection services end to end through HP that offers cloud consumption and experience across the spectrum from disaster recovery, backup, as well as archive. Every facet of data protection is offered as a service through HP. These services deliver every SLA from rapid recovery to long term data retention, either on premises or in the cloud, along with operational simplicity. Modernizing data protection is key to keeping pace with today's changing hybrid cloud environments and ensuring data and application achieve always on availability. While your organization will have its own set of requirements, in general, you should focus on cost efficiency, simplicity, and future readiness while architecting your data protection and disaster recovery strategy. Data protection through HP with on premises and enterprise cloud backup service gives you the peace of mind that your data is rapidly recoverable, always secure, and provides value to your business without compromise. We help customers protect data wherever it is, improving efficiencies by simplifying operations, aligning infrastructure with actual use, and turning backup data into an asset. Thank you for joining us today. I hope this was good use of your time. And if you have any questions, we are happy to answer them. Over to you, David.
Great presentation, Ashwin and Jenna. We do have some questions for you from the audience. Let's see. First question that came in, this one's for you, Ashwin. They're asking, do we need to deploy Store Once in our on-premises environment to back up with HPE Cloud Volumes Backup?
Thank you for your question. The answer is you do not need HP Store once to start using HP Cloud Volumes Backup. In fact, you can backup from any HP or non-HP storage directly to the cloud using Cloud Volumes Backup. Uh, Existing Store Once customers can utilize Cloud Volumes Backup and backup their data from their on-premises environment to the cloud as a part of the hybrid cloud data protection solution.
Very nice. Excellent. And then next question for you, Jenna. They say they're getting started with cloud and they're asking, is there some way to try out or get started with HPE Cloud Volumes? Is there some sort of test drive?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're actually running a promotion right now where customers can, with no commitment, start taking advantage of Cloud Volumes and all the benefits that we outlined in our presentation. So the first, and these two can be combined together. So customers can request 10 TB of free Cloud Volumes capacity per month for 90 days. So no commitment required, no credit card, just reach out. There is actually a link in the additional resources section that outlines this. There's also a second promotion as well, and this again can be combined with the 10 TB of free capacity. But if you make a qualifying purchase of a subscription of Cloud Volumes, you get a $3,500 credit taken off. So those two offers can be combined, and it's a great way for customers to try out HPE Cloud Volumes.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity to get started. And then final question here for you, Ashwin. They're asking, what are the benefits of Cloud Volumes Backup compared to other cloud service providers?
That's a good question, and thanks for asking. HP Cloud Volumes Backup Service allows customers to avoid public cloud lock-in and eliminates any egress charges with the flexibility to recover on premises for operational restore or in the cloud to run other secondary workloads. It can also unify a backup in the cloud with open support for any primary storage array and any backup ISV. And these are some significant benefits in comparison to existing cloud backup alternatives.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in our live Q&A session. But Jenna, Ashwin, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
All right, I've just brought up the poll question for everyone out there in the audience that says, what additional information would you like about the HPE solution? And I will leave that up here while we announce our first set of prizes. I want to thank everyone out there for your excellent questions. We've got so many questions rolling in. The HPE team is steadily working through those. There's a lot of questions, but we will do our best to get back to you. We do appreciate those, and those all count towards our best question prize that we're running on the event today. So keep those coming. Let's see. Our first set of prizes here, we have an Amazon $500 gift card, and might as well go ahead and give out one of those grand prizes, one of those DJI Mavic Air 2 drones. We have an Amazon gift card going out to Gary Sudin from Missouri. Congratulations. And our first drone is going out to Rubino Robinson from Illinois. Congratulations to both of the prize winners. A lot more prizes still to give out on the event today, so stay tuned. I'll give you a few moments to answer that poll question on the screen, and then we'll move on to our next presentation. All right, thank you everyone who responded to the poll there. We do appreciate that. Congratulations once again to the prize winners. And with that, it's time now to move on to our next presentation on today's Data Protection and Disaster Recovery Megacast. I'm excited to introduce you to Mr. Andrew Peters, Stealth Industry Director at Unisys, and Mr. Dave Finley, Director of Information Assurance and Security, Data Protection Division at Dell Technologies. Andrew and Dave, thanks for being here. Take it away.
Thanks, David. Really appreciate this and being here. Today we're going to be talking about really the concept, what do you do when the bad guy wins. And this is the concept of ransomware and how it's affecting organizations. We're calling this the golden age of ransomware. And why is that? Well, ransomware actually came out, first started showing its head in the 80s, and it's quickly grown to be something that was an annoyance to something that's a huge cost, and really totally affecting the way that organizations look at their business continuity, part of their business continuance. And why they call it the golden age was almost like the golden age of piracy that went from 1750 to 1821. Okay, it was just had a huge impact on a specific part of the world and its ability to move goods so much that the British Navy took it upon themselves to virtually wipe it out. But at this point in time, ransomware is really taking a hold and having such an effect on organizations. They have to really rethink not only their security strategy, but the way that they recover. And the reason is that the attacks and the bad guys are so much more sophisticated than they have been in past. There's a lot of money in this. They operate as like organizations. They hire very good specialists. They have labs. They attain defense technologies. They learn it. They reverse engineer it, and they develop technologies. Like if you've heard about wasted locker, that's been used. It's been coming up quite a bit. They actually have technology in there to detect endpoint technologies and avoid it. And so remain hidden as they do their nasty stuff inside organizations, doing their network mapping and learning what's critical and key to an organization. Because the strategy here is to take an organization and get it to the position where they have two choices. And one is pay the ransom, and two is go out of business. And that way that you can squeeze and extort an organization. Okay, and at the end of the day, what they're doing is effective, obviously, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here talking about ransomware. But we don't have to do a beatdown on ransomware, because if you're on this call, you're probably well aware of it and the threats it's bringing to your organization. So we're not going to really focus on that. We want to focus on the things you can do about it. But to make the final points here, it's profitable, which is one of the reasons it's not going away. And there's another thing here too, it's growing. And just because your technology you used in your defense worked today doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work tomorrow. The bad guys are going after the low-hanging fruit, the places they can get their best returns from, and then they're going to move on to other operations and organizations as they continually improve the way that they're able to affect an operation. And also, we have to think about, ransomware is an operation. It's not just necessarily some software, because you think about SolarWinds. What's that all about? Well, SolarWinds in that breach was used as a backdoor into organizations where the Trojan horses can be dropped in, and network mapping will take place to understand how an operation works. So we got to think about the fact it's not just ransomware itself, it's about the operation that's continually improving their craft and the way that they work to get into organizations. But one of the challenges you're going to face here, the extenuating factor is that legacy security is not working. If it was, once again, we wouldn't be talking about this now. A lot of concepts of security based on basically the precept of that there's a wall, there's a good side, there's a bad side, there's good things, there's bad things, and we have to get to the point and realize that's not what it's all about. We have to deal with the concept of what if everything fails. And this is what, in my experience in working with the U.S. Air Force Information Warfare Center, is that's the world they dealt in. What if we lose? How do we respond then? And also understanding that the bad guys, they want to disrupt our operation. They want to take us out of business. They want to force us to pay the ransom. And as you know, ransoms have gone up from where they were things that were in the tens of thousands of dollars, and they ask into the tens of millions. So the ask is going up because they know if they get their arms around an organization and can stop it from doing business, that they can extort that kind of money. And a big challenge here is that at the end of the day, there's just not really a brilliant plan for cyber recovery. They can be half-baked. And we run into organizations, we talk to them all the time. Why don't you have a more robust secure cyber recovery program in place? And they're like, one, it's the cost. You have to weigh that against what's the cost of going out of business. There's basically, we have an alternate plan, and that's going to be, we're going to use our disaster recovery. And you wonder, is that going to work? Well, it might. but is that going to be a good plan? Knowing that you're likely to get hit, and it's going to hit you, it's going to get your organization sooner or later where you're going to see one of these meltdowns. But you ask yourself, is disaster, is it DR good enough? Dave, what do you think about disaster recovery being good enough for an organization?
That's a good question, Andrew. And that, last year we really started looking at that a lot more closely after the guidance was given to us by the FDIC. And in that guidance, they told the member banks, which is basically all the banks and financial institutions here in the United States, that disaster recovery, that the way they've been doing it for a number of decades, was fabulous. The idea of copying from one, primary location to a disaster location or a colo or somewhere else, and having an instant restore, a near instant restore, a failover, a failback, and all the things we know of for disaster recovery is something that they all do famously, and they should continue. But in the guidance, they went on to say that if you must realize that if you do it just that way, then you very well could copy malware from your primary systems to your DR systems and actually be affected in both locations. So the reality of it is disaster recovery is not good enough for cyber recovery. We're solving two different things with cyber recovery and disaster recovery, as evidenced on this slide. And we need to put real thought into how we recover from cyber events. They're so different than recovery from a disaster event, right? In a cyber event, you may have just partial systems that are affected. You may have all systems that are affected. You may have systems in multiple locations that are affected, right, that you need to recover. And then recovery is a different animal from a cyber perspective, because recovery from cyber means that you may indeed have malware in multiple locations, and you're going to need to know where that malware is and what it really has affected. So really, we believe that not only do we need to have disaster recovery and have a disaster recovery site, but we need a cyber recovery third level copy of this information. It kind of goes back to the old 3-2-1 rule, Andrew, where years ago when we were writing things to tape and putting tapes into vaults and silos and so forth, we would make that third copy, we take it offline, and essentially it was out of the way, so the bad guys couldn't get there in that sense. In those days, the bad guys weren't really around. Nowadays they are. So DR was great. Tape was great for DR back in those days, but it's not so great anymore, because even then you can copy malware to tape. So recovery there could be problematic. So again, we believe that the third copy is necessary, but the best construct to be able to do that today is to have it, as the FBI says, and Homeland Security and others in the government say, have that third copy completely segmented, or ideally air-gapped, protected by an operational air gap to keep it completely offline, and have that circuit protected in such a way to where malware and the threat actors can't traverse that connection, as you see in this slide, to go into what we would call a cyber recovery vault. That way, this third level, this third copy, is always secured and can always be brought back into play for recovery.
Well, Dave, a quick question in that, if I'm a bad guy, I know you may have that third copy, so I'm going to pollute your data. So if you're even if you're backing stuff up into that vault, how do you know that it's going to be okay to recover?
Well, that's a great question. When you think about it we talked about, from a tape perspective, when you copy all your data, and we're talking about some folks are copying, millions and millions of files for a third copy. How do you know that all those files are clean? How do you know that all those file systems are clean? So it becomes a very daunting task. Even copying all this stuff into a cloud provider, how do you know that it's clean and you don't have a piece of malware festering somewhere? There's two things that we do, Andrew, to protect our customers with this. One, when we copy the information into what you see here as a cyber vault, it's copied into that cyber vault in a way to where malware cannot execute. So when we bring, say, a database or a file system into the cyber vault, malware cannot execute in that environment. It's absolutely impossible. So you have a secure connection coming in, Nothing can get in except for the data we want to have come in. And then we have data that's in the cyber vault where malware can't execute. And then the next thing we do, Andrew, is we're going to take that same data and we're going to subject it to a whole group of cyber scans. And with the cyber sense software, we'll actually go and look at the data in what's called a deep content analysis and scan it, looking for what we call indications of compromise. And I believe the next slide maybe talk to that fact, where we actually will have an automated air gap. We will lock the data off when it comes inside the vault, and then we actually run the cyber analytics against it, looking for indications of compromise. So here's the net of it. Keep it offline, or as offline as possible on the other side of an operational air gap, to where the data that's copied inside the cyber vault, even if you were to inadvertently copy in a piece of malware, it cannot execute inside the cyber vault. But then go to the next level and lock it, make it immutable, and then scan it, looking for any level of compromise that you may have in the data. So the first thing we do after we lock the data in the vault and make it immutable is we scan it. Again, this is a deep content level scan. And that scan is going to take, for instance, a database and do it at the byte level within the scan. The next slide, please. So the scan looks at the byte level analysis of the file or the database, compares it against what we've taught the artificial intelligence engine about how malware affects data, and it'll allow us to know whether malware has touched a particular data set. We run those analytics and we run it against the data, and there's over 100, I think it's 120 plus different statistics we're looking at today. Then we'll run the analysis, we'll learn and we'll learn and we'll learn. At the end of the day, we'll be able to tell whether malware has touched the data at a level of 99.5% accuracy. We do this and repeat, Andrew, and then we're set. So we know the data is clean. We know we can restore the data. The only thing left is we have to be able to adequately manage the ins and outs of the vault. We need to manage and monitor and update from production and SOCs and NOCs to be able to watch all this stuff, because this is all automated. We have to watch it over time. And that's where the combination of what we're doing with Stealth from Unisys really shines. And that's the next part for you.
Well, that's a great segue. So what we're going to do is take a look at operationally, how does a cyber recovery vault work? Now, I'm going to start off with one of the complications you have is typically you tool a network for your security and you would tool it for your network. Now, one common method of securing here, as I did mention a bit before, is if you look here on the left, is the concept of segmentation, where you have a firewall technology and you would have a domain within that, or many domains, and in that there's going to be communications between devices. Problem is, if the communicator doesn't go through the firewall, it can't apply any security on it. And bad guys have a nasty habit of finding ways into those environments using backdoors, a la SolarWinds, as I just mentioned. It's like, let's find a way in. And even though this is a trusted operation, you can help better secure that and reduce your attack surface by the use of microsegmentation. And Stealth is a software-based, identity-based microsegmentation technology that lets me do a few things. And the reason I'm explaining this is that we're going to show you how this looks in a whole recovery operation. So we're going to give you a bit of a quick walkthrough of a day in the life of a file, if you will, a bad day, the day of a life of a file. Okay, so first things first, we're able to put this cryptographic wrapper around every device, every critical device that we really care about. Now, once it's on there, Stealth does exactly stealthy things, because it requires a cryptographic key from a trusted entity before it will even respond to it. So if you're on a network and you're trying to do discovery, which is the first thing that would be done in any, in the Lockheed Martin kill chain, first things first is discovery. You got to know it's there. Well, if you ping a device or you try to do any port scans or anything on a stealth protect device, it doesn't respond. It takes your SYN packet and throws it on the floor. So you're virtually undiscoverable in the network. Second thing, it is zero trust. So even if you have the address, unless you have the appropriate cryptographic key, you can't get access. Now, those cryptographic keys are only given to members of what we call a community of interest. And a community of interest is more or less a workflow, or it could be considered a security group or application dependency, whatever you want to call it. This could be comprised of servers. It can be comprised of end users, services, all kinds of things that you would require in this, what you'd call a microsegment. So we form these communities of interest, and all communications between them are encrypted. So we can create very secure enclaves within virtually any network environment. And this is especially important when we're getting into the concept of cyber recovery. Because one of the things about cyber recovery, while we can get the data into the vault, there's some things that we need to do to get the data back out of the vault and get users back on the network. And so I'm going to go through this in 9 steps here. I'm going to explain this to you. So let's talk about, what does this architecture look like first? First things first is we have a vault on the right. If you notice at the top, we have management. We have Stealth Enterprise Manager. This is going to be for policy and identity management. We have a CyberSense analysis, which we're going to use to determine if the data has been corrupted. Also, there's these recovery hosts that can be used to rebuild your services within the vault before you export them back into the production environment. Of course, we require a backup server in there, and on both sides in the production network and in the vault, we have a data domain, okay, the market-leading deduplication solid state appliance. Okay, now I want you to notice between them is that we have this replication air gap. This is going directly between the production data domain and the vault data domain. In this case, it's going across a network, but we're going to be virtually isolating almost every aspect of the vault from the rest of the network. But we still need to communicate with the network. And why is that? Well, because we still have our management that's remote, our updates, communications, because of what if something happens, it's got to communicate. And then finally, there's the aspect of getting the information back out of the vault. So if you notice, there's this dashed red line in a white area. This is where we're creating virtual clean rooms. In some instances, we can run the software. Our software will actually run on the system itself. It can be virtual, or sometimes we may require a gateway. If we have a closed system, such as the vault data domain, we can't load it on there. We'd use a server, and we load our software on that. So you're getting the net effects the same. Also in our SOC and our NOC, we have isolated devices as well. So it's as though they were inside the vault, even though they're outside the vault. And so these enclave, these devices can operate independent of the rest of the network, or without visibility from the rest of the network. So what happens here first? Let's go into, here's a community of interest we created that's called replication. Okay, so every day what happens is, it could be once a day, it could be multiple times a day. The production data domain and the vault data domain communicate. The air gap is closed, and the data that's critical to an organization is moved from the production data domain into the vault data domain. This may comprise maybe anywhere from 15 to 20% of the total data. This is the data, these are the applications, these are the services that are most critical to any company and its operations. Okay, so this community of interest means that the endpoints, the data, everything between them is encrypted, as well as the communication back to the CR management. Now, it's important to note too, in dealing in the world of what if, as a security professional, I have to think, what if something got inside the vault? Now, we don't want to think that's going to happen, just like I get in my car. I never want to think that I'm going to get in an accident, but I could, and I want to be prepared for it. And it's the same thing here, is that we're prepared for it. So the data is moved into the vault where it's retention locked, can't be changed. Okay, what happens after it's in there? Well, no, I've got a different community of interest that I'm showing in the green highlights. The Cyber Recovery Management System says, hey, Vault, you got new data. I want you to sling it over here to CyberSense on this community of interest, where it's going to be analyzed for chaos. It's going to look for indicators of compromise, as Dave was talking about before. So even though it may not identify the specific malware that was used or ransomware that was used, what it's going to identify is the fact that the data has been compromised or corrupted. So I don't have to know what it is, I just have to know what it does. And that's what's really critical to this, is that while there's other bad guy software that's being developed to avoid detection, if it does any damage or anything to the data, we can find it. Even though we may not know what it is, we know that it's had its nasty effect. Okay, Now, next, what happens? We got hit, ransomware attack, okay? And it detonated on systems all over the place. It stopped our company and our operation. However, all the stealth protected systems in the vault are able to continue to operate because you can't see them. They can't touch them. They can't communicate with them. And they can only communicate with their trusted communities of interest. Okay, so what do we do next? Well, we have another community of interest. Okay, there's more here because now we've added analysis to this. So I've got, if you look down at the bottom of the SOC knock component, you can see there's this logarithm or Splunk. So I am monitoring the activities within a community of interest. Why? What if something in there goes rogue somehow? And this is going to what if. I want to make sure that I'm going to be watching that so I can monitor the behaviors inside the community of interest. And if there is a dispute in the way that something's operating in there or something's unusual or crazy, I can isolate that device through software in as little as 10 seconds. Okay, so I can take it out of action pretty quickly because, again, these are my critical operations. So what am I doing here in this circumstance? Well, what I'm doing is I would start off in my CR management system, and I would determine, I'd go to my run book. Okay, and the run book is something that Dell would help an organization determine how do we restart ourselves in every situation. So if we're offline, if our routing tables have been disrupted and our Active Directory has been disrupted, where do we start? What's the first operation that we needed to recover, and then how are we going to follow that? So I would go say that, there's this first application, I'm going to require the application and a number of different files to restore that from operation. And I can manage this whole thing from a single pane of glass. So I go to my CR manager and I tell the backup server, I need you to pull these files. But I can see some of the files are corrupted and some of the files that I have, the most recent files, are good. So I'm going to deselect the most recent files that are corrupted, and I'm going to go to the last known good copy of those files. I'm going to pull those up. So I might have a mix of fresh, clean copies, but I'm going to deselect the corrupted copies and go to the last known good copy of it. And if I've been updating this regularly, it's the worst it's going to be is maybe 24 hours old. It might only be a few hours old. But anyway, it's better to have older data than have corrupted data. Right? So then what I'm going to do is tell my Vault backup server, take those files and move them into the cyber recovery host that's in here. Okay? And I rebuild it in there. Now, just in case that data was somehow corrupted, here's my what if is going to kick in again. I have something in there called a directional COI, which virtually isolates that cyber recovery host. So I can build on it, but it's not able to establish any connection with anything else. So somehow there was some form of malware on a system in the vault, it's not able to set up and establish a session. Okay, so I've rebuilt a service. Okay, now what am I going to do? How do I get it back out of the vault? Now you may have noticed that this critical services server suddenly lost its lock with the skull and crossbones on it. Well, why? It's because I had my IT services pull a gold copy from my vault data domain, and they walked it out. They yanked this server off the net. They sandblasted it down to bare metal, and they rebuilt it. And then they added stealth. Adding stealth took another few seconds, okay, or let's say maybe a minute, 60 seconds. Put it back on the network. When it goes back on the network, it goes into a services COI that allows the enterprise manager to tell it what it is and what its policies are. And so it will put it on a community of interest to rebuild this server. Okay, so as soon as it's back on the network, it's invisible to everything else except for its community of interest. So now I can take that rebuilt recovery host and I can port it into the production network onto that server. I can get that up and running. Okay, and here's the thing, my network's still polluted. And why do you care? Because there's a question we'll ask customers. If you're gonna recover your services, you probably need to wait till IT security cleans up your production network, correct? Correct. How long does that take? I don't know. Okay, day, a week, a month, we don't know. It could take it could take quite a long time. And what happens when you start to rebuild in a polluted environment, or if you're going to have to retool your entire network and your security infrastructure? There's a lot there. There's a lot of risk that can be in this. We take that risk, that hassle, and take it right off so you can start your rebuild as soon as you need to. Okay. But there's another circumstance. Maybe I've got to bring up so many servers, I don't want to do this 2-hop thing of building them in the vault and then moving to production. Well, I can rebuild that directly in production. So I can tell my vault backup server, pull the files and move them to the specific server in the network as quickly as I need to. Okay, so here's another community of interest for that. Now, finally, how do I get my users back on? Because that's a big question too. I got my services going, but their systems may have been corrupted and compromised. So I got my IT services to use the gold copies. It's pulling up the data domain, so we know we have a place where we're going to have clean data, clean files, clean applications, and we're going to reimage those user systems and put stealth on them. Okay, as soon as they hit the network, based on their role in the organization, it's going to be pulled from Active Directory. As soon as they hit that, they're going to be allowed into their work-specific community of interest. And it might be engineering, it might be human resources. Okay, so when they come back on, without having to retool the network or do anything, I can get large numbers of users securely back on their environment, back in their operations, and my network still may be corrupted. It still may be compromised. So what's the final thing that I want to put together here? Well, what if one of these users goes rogue or their system wasn't properly cleaned? Isn't that going to reintroduce this problem back into the network? Well, this is where we can monitor it. We can look for activities such as, trying to do discovery in the network and there's a failed connection request, okay? And maybe we hit a couple of them. Our SIM says that's bad. Isolate that device, put it into a forensics community of interest so IT security can go analyze it and we can continue operations. So in a nutshell, Dell Cyber Recovery is a complete engineered solution end-to-end with a number of different parts in it, okay, that all work together as one solution. And the first things first is like, why fast? Why day zero? Because every minute your critical operations are out, it's costing you money. Okay, and or it could be putting people's lives at stake. This is really important to start recovery as quickly as possible to actually have control of it with data that we know is ransomware free. So you can be confident that the data that you're building is not going to re-detonate inside your environment, and that you can have a secure operations up and running very quickly in your organization. Okay, with that, I think we've met our targeted timeframes for this presentation, and I'm going to hand it back to you, David.
All right, thank you so much, Andrew and Dave. Really excellent presentation. We got a ton of questions coming in. I regret that we don't have time to verbally answer all these questions, so we'll be doing our best to answer those electronically. Thank you to the Unisys and Dell team for your assistance with that. I've just brought up the poll question for everyone out there in the audience that says, what additional information would you like about the Unisys Dell Technologies solution that you just learned about? And I will leave that up while I announce our next set of prize winners. All right, thank you everyone who's responding to the poll. We do appreciate it. Our next Amazon $500 gift card is going to Monty Plyburn from Illinois. Congratulations, Monty Plyburn from Illinois. And our next grand prize for another DJI drone, man, those are awesome. This is going to Justin Shively from Indiana. Congratulations, Justin Shively and Monty Plyburn from Illinois and Justin Shively from Indiana. Congratulations to all the prize winners. I will post the names there in the questions box as well. I'll give you a moment longer just to respond to this poll, make sure we get everyone. Thank you for that. All right, we appreciate those responses and all the excellent questions as well. And now it's time to keep the Megacast rolling here. I'm excited to introduce you to our next presenter. That is Mr. Peter Elliman, Director of Product Marketing at Druva. Peter, are you there?
I am here, yes, thank you.
Thanks for being on, Peter. Take it away.
Oh, thanks so much. And thank you all for the time. I'm going to talk to you really about another way of thinking about where you're going with backup and your DR strategy, and really how cloud backup can be a way to future-proof what you're doing, giving you really a different type of toolbox to use. So if you look really at the landscape today, there's a data revolution that's going on, and you're seeing changes in both sort of business and application models, right? So you probably already know that your data has left the building, and it's spread across hybrid clouds and endpoints and edge devices. And of course, applications are no longer monolithic, but made up of composite elements, increasingly, containers and microservices. So as the picture shows, really, your data and applications live in more places, but ultimately, a lot of that data is moving towards the cloud because we can do more with the data when it's centralized, shared, and protected. So initially, right, it lived in the data center, then it started to live in endpoints, then cloud apps, and then ultimately, it's moved to containers, which are going to provide more platform and environmental portability. So, but one of the gaps that organizations increasingly are facing is, how do I protect all of this data, and what type of architecture should I use to sort of avoid the data silos that are really kind of reemerging in this new landscape. And so, with all these changes, it's no surprise that data protection models are changing and moving to the cloud as well. A recent ESG survey indicates that 40% of enterprise applications, I should say, run on cloud infrastructure. And that's expected to grow to 58% in the next 24 months. So it's increasing and changing. Now, there's specific business needs which cloud is well positioned to meet, right? So the pay-for-use model appeals to lines of business as well as broader organization groups because you're aligning your cost to your use, and on-demand capacity allows you to do that, and gives you that ability to eliminate often the stranded capacity and compute that exist with typical infrastructure that you're buying and putting on premises on a usually a 5-year sort of plan. Now, scale is another critical thing, especially say in a pandemic type world where we live today, and it's harder to bring in people, hardware to new places or upgrading things that you're doing in your environment, even though workloads are changing and data is still growing. So how do you give your organization the flexibility, the adaptability it needs, the scale ultimately? And cloud, of course, can offer that infinite scale to help you meet that challenge more easily. And so, of course, speaking of agile, right, is organizations is obviously striving to be more agile these days, and a key part of agility is this idea of self-service. So, as new applications are coming on board, or perhaps offices, locations are changing, IT teams want to be able to, protect these organizations or these new applications automatically, and be able to restore data if the need arises, right? Sort of in a self-serve basis. And then finally, we live in a global world, but we have localized regulations. And so, IT teams expect the backups to be there. However, they're not going to be there unless we plan for it. So this ability to have, sort of the ease of global control, but also have that data sort of locally so you can meet your central governance needs. So cloud really is well positioned to meet the direction that businesses are going, and specifically the applications that are powering businesses. Druva Cloud Platform is designed really to meet this. It's built in the cloud, powered by AWS, and designed really to protect all of these data sources, from the edge to data center and remote offices, to applications and services that you're running in the cloud. And when we built the platform, we weren't thinking just about, how do I back up and store that data in the cloud, but more importantly, what other services can we build into that once all that data is centralized? So you have data protection, which is both the backup, recovery, and DR aspects that you would expect, but also data governance, the ability to better manage and control where that data is, and then finally, cyber resilience capabilities. And that relates to not just isolating the data, but also being able to provide additional insight to customers in the event that a ransomware attack happens. So insight before to better monitor the state of things, and then tools to help you in the event of an attack with a recovery process. So I want to talk a little bit more on the data center side, because certainly sometimes customers are thinking, why start in the data center? What's there? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. If you look at the data center workloads and where they're moving, often the current data protection model really just isn't going to get you there. And this isn't just because, regardless of whether your existing on-premises product moves or has cloud capabilities, but also because the end goal of data protection is to give your organization resiliency. And resiliency means the ability to perform DR or something sort of beyond DR, right? And so in the old model, you had this idea of often, right, you've got at least 2 copies of data. So you have your data off-site, and you're going to usually have hardware and software, of course, in both of those sites. And a lot of organizations, pretty much all enterprises, have multiple vendors. So this just adds costs in terms of, because there's a lot of duplication and because there's a lot of overhead related to managing the full infrastructure stack. And then the other challenge really there relates to, of course, the validation of how well recovery works and whether you're able to meet your recovery objectives. And those SLAs, of course, are going to vary. Most organizations have multiple tiers of recovery. And then finally, complexity. So with that complexity comes risk, and as we know, ransomware has roared to the forefront and really been forcing organizations to re-examine where and how they're storing their data. So how does cloud change this? Well, one of the things it does is it removes a lot of the duplication, both at a data perspective, and from a hardware perspective. So you put all that data in the cloud, you've just got one copy of data there. So more efficient from a storage perspective, more efficient from a hardware and software perspective, right? You eliminated that. And then more importantly, it's just easier to manage. And that's what drives this TCO piece. The second aspect is when that data is in the cloud, you actually can perform and test a recovery in the cloud. That means you don't have to bring a team together to execute a DR runbook in another location, at least as it relates to your applications and data. So you've simply got the cloud that's there available to use on demand, and allows you to really test as frequently and at the scale you need in order to sort of meet your own internal SLAs. And then finally, in terms of risks, the nice thing is that you define your policies, and the SaaS platform really scales to meet the rest of what you have. And so you have much more transparency into what is happening, and as well as your ability to meet your goals. So if you have in the data center today, most infrastructure would look something like what we have on the left. You've got your production servers, some backup software, and a backup server or some type of appliance. And what you see here is really where typically folks are going to have limitations in terms of moving, in terms of scaling and in terms of moving data to the cloud, right? And so in the first element, in this picture, often your scale can be limited by the efficiency of the software and hardware that you have there. So what it is you're able to do from a media server or backup software hardware combination in terms of moving that data. And then the second piece will be related to just how that appliance or storage appliance is able to scale on the back end in terms of meeting your workload needs. And then finally, the last piece is, well, today you're probably putting that redundant data both at a secondary site, and then you're probably, for long-term retention purposes, putting it out to tape. Now, in some instances, you might be putting that data off to the cloud. We call that sort of cloud out. But for a lot of customers, that that can create some unexpected cost in terms of ingress or egress. And certainly, it's that cloud out is probably really just for long-term archive. And sometimes finding or getting that data, indexing and getting out can be difficult. But typically, the biggest problem is just you're not getting the storage efficiency that you want when you're just sort of pushing the data from an on-premise location to the cloud. With a direct-to-cloud model where your storage engine lives in the cloud, you're really able to remove a lot of these barriers. So, the first one relates to the scale that you have on premises. Really, you are able to send, the cloud essentially has that dedupe engine, and by doing source-based deduplication and leveraging elements like incremental forever, you're able to significantly reduce the amount of data that's moving out of your data center and up to the cloud. And then finally, because the cloud has that infinite scale, and because the dedupe engine lives in the cloud, you've always got the capacity that you need, and are able to sort of bring that to bear from a backup or recovery purpose. And then finally, when it lands in the cloud, you can leverage things like warm and cold storage. And I'll talk a little bit more about long-term retention with Druva, but that makes it, again, simpler. You're putting that data in one place, and both for DR purposes and for long-term retention. And then finally, sort of the fourth element is you're doing all this, but you really have just a single bill and a single vendor to manage. And so really at the end of the day, for example, with the Druva model, all you're paying for is the dedupe data that you store in the cloud. So it doesn't matter how many clients, databases, or elements that you deploy, you just have sort of one element to manage, and that can become easy to predict and manage. So a little bit more specifically. So that was really about, look, if you try to move or take your existing data center solution, some of the challenges with both cloud out and challenges in sort of scaling that versus what you can do with a cloud-based model. So why Druva today? Well, we've got over 4,000 enterprise customers, built natively on AWS, and a growing amount of data under management, over 150 petabytes. We're one of Amazon's or AWS's top 3 storage partners today. Now, our building more specifically on how it is that we can eliminate the cost and complexity around protecting data in all these silos. And a lot of times our customers come to us because they're looking to streamline or simplify their backup infrastructure and be able to make it easier to grow. So what you see on the left really are the workloads that we protect. It really doesn't actually matter where those workloads live. They can live on premises or they can live in the cloud. And often, frankly, we find customers are doing both. And that's one of the reasons they start to look to Druva, is because when they start to make that move to the cloud from a workload perspective, they begin to see that basing data protection in the cloud starts to make a lot of sense. And then finally, there's the new workloads as well. So in addition to just what lives in the data center, there's the mix of sort of SaaS applications that you might have running, as well as any native workloads that you might be running or putting in AWS on EC2. So Druva is really ultimately sort of able to protect all these. And as you put that data into the Druva cloud, it allows you to minimize or eliminate the need for duplicate data centers because you have this cloud-based DR capability within Druva. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but Druva's DR, we call it DR as a service, DRaaS, helps you to fail over your VMware workloads into your own VPC. And the beauty is it's automated, secure, and fast, and can help you meet RTOs of minutes. So really, it's able to meet a large number of your sort of recovery to your objectives. And then finally, once it's in there, you're lowering your TCO, right? So traditionally, we talked about all the different pieces of infrastructure you might have in your data center, not to mention what you might be using for some of the other workloads, be they SaaS apps or things in AWS. And so by essentially eliminating some of those up front, only paying for what you consume as you consume it, you're really able to eliminate a lot of those costs. So you're getting the TCO and you're able to better manage your data for both recovery and long-term retention and compliance needs. On the long-term retention side, I was talking on one slide previously about often the thought is, hey, let me just, one way to use cloud is let me just push what I have in the data center out to the cloud. I'll stop using tape or stop using my on-prem disk and just put it up there. And so you might run essentially part of your storage service or up in the cloud. And the challenge ultimately is, as you can see from the picture here, you're still actually running some type of storage software or service in the cloud because you don't have any type of native storage system that's running in the cloud. I mean, you're putting one in, but you're running it there. So now you're going to have really twice the storage management, management. And then more importantly, as you move that data in there, you're typically not going to have very good deduplication, or if you do, it's going to be a separate deduplication pool from what you have on premises. And if it's not a separate deduplication pool from what you have on premises, then it probably means having to manage the metadata engine for that deduplication on premises. So it can start to be, a little bit on the risky side to be putting a lot of your long-term retention data in the cloud, but having to sort of manage and protect a metadata source that lives on premises there. So essentially getting that storage efficiency when you start on premises and push it up into the cloud can be difficult. So that's the idea that, if you just take a copy of data from on-prem and push it to cold storage, that's just a fresh new copy of data. You basically had to rehydrate that data and so take that dedupe data, rehydrate it so it's like a full, and then you dump it into cold storage. So you're really just not getting that optimization that you can get. Now, when your dedupe engine, when your storage engine is built in the cloud, you're able to eliminate that, right? And so Druva offers a long-term retention capability, frankly, two types. One where we'll put the data on warm storage and then automatically move it to cold storage after a given period of time. And really all we do is move the change blocks. So it's very efficient for you. And then you reduce your storage cost when you use LTR, so it's not the same price ultimately. So you have storage tiering to help you meet the long-term retention capabilities. And then we also offer a capability where if you want to send backup data simply directly to cold for compliance purposes, we offer that as well. It's direct to cold backup. And there you're going to get even greater savings because again, you're not storing the data on warm, you're just sending it direct to cold. And Druva simply passes these savings back onto you. But all of that is managed in the cloud. All that metadata lives in the cloud. So we're able to make it easy for you to search and recover that data wherever it lives. All right, so how can you impact change? Well, the first thing I'd say is, it's a mindset. So, adopting SaaS data protection is not just about the technology, the global deduplication, incremental forevers, other things like that. It's about an operational mind shift, and it's a transformation that really gives your team the ability to focus on data and some of your SLAs and less on the infrastructure management. And so focusing on specific workload challenges rather than products will often help you make that jump and really help you drive additional efficiencies. And so some of the ones we find customers coming to us to speak about are file, data, and long-term retention. Customers are moving those types of file workloads to the cloud and want to be able to have a common way to protect those. Others relate to sort of DR as a service or consolidating data centers. The other piece is new projects. So if you're starting to look at VMware Cloud, or you're looking at moving or migrating applications or databases like SQL, Oracle, starting with the cloud is easy, right? Because there's no infrastructure to deploy, and with Druva, you can start using it in less than 15 minutes. So very fast to start and minimal barriers there. And then, some of the other things like SaaS apps or remote offices can be driven by security concerns or just sort of a lack of flexibility in terms of storage. So two quick customer case studies that sort of highlight this. So the University of Manchester was looking to move really everything to the cloud. They were heavily vested in VMware and were adopting VMC and had multiple products, including Veeam and some other providers. And when they looked at how can I use my existing products to protect what I'm putting in the cloud, what they found is, the costs and the complexity were going to be too great. And so they looked at Druva and really were able to drive significant savings in terms of storage costs. So again, a 50% storage cost reduction. A lot of that was driven just from the global dedupe they were able to achieve by centralizing really all of that data in the cloud. Cats Media, another example of customer with multiple solutions in the data center. They had, they were facing, performance challenges as well as just operational challenges. So in terms of staying on the latest version, staying updated across the different products, both from a software and hardware side, was difficult. And so by moving to the Druva Cloud platform, it's always up to date, SaaS platform. So there's new features that come, frankly, twice a month, always up to date. And they got out of the business of managing that on-prem hardware across different sites. And they were able to tap in and leverage cloud-based DR, which really offers, from the Druva side, offers one-click automated recovery. So I talk a little bit more about the failover capability, but the nice thing is Druva has built not only the ability to have a DR plan, but to do what we call pre-flight testing. So you can validate essentially credentials and VM type so that failover, which can occur in minutes. So by minutes, we say under 30 minutes to get your VMs failed over and running in your own VPC. So Cats did it really quickly, 52 workloads migrated, as you can see, in under 3 months, and a lot of great savings by partnering with both Druva and AWS. So what I hope you'll consider is just go out and look for yourself at some of the savings you might be able to get. We have a simple 5-step TCO calculator, tco.druva.com. Love to give a more in-depth demo to you around some of the workloads you might be considering or challenges you might be facing, or simply start a trial. Thanks so much.
Great presentation, Peter. I really do appreciate that. we have some questions for you from the audience. While we do that, we've got the poll there on the screen for everyone that says, what additional information would you like about Druva? As Peter mentioned, they would be glad to do a more personal demo. That option is right there on the screen as well. So just check that if you'd like to see the solution for yourself and get all your questions answered in a smaller, more personal setting. So let's see. Let's start off with some questions here from the audience. Peter, first question I see that came in, actually there's a couple of these around immutability. Does Druva offer something around immutability to protect the data to make sure it's not changed?
So Druva has, yes, so to answer your question, the data that you put in the Druva cloud is isolated from your network. And so you essentially are able to create that air gap with that data. And Druva doesn't have access to your data. And really the only way that your data can be touched is via the Druva application, right? And so that data really can't be changed by any person or any kind of access to that data. And so you're able essentially to create that security where for most customers, the concern frankly is around ransomware being able to attack their backups. And that's not going to happen with Druva because the data is off your corporate network, isolated in the Druva cloud, which is built on AWS. And then both Druva and AWS have sort of multiple security measures, to help you from a network perspective. So your data is very much sort of protected from ransomware from that perspective. And then we have some ransomware recovery capabilities that could go into you with greater depth, or you can find out on our website.
Excellent, excellent. Let's see, next question, Stephen's asking if you can tell us a little bit more about egress charges. I'm sure that's a common question that comes up when folks talk about using public cloud in some way for disaster recovery. How does that work with Druva?
Yeah, there's no ingress or egress charges. So that's with Druva you only pay for your with Druva you only pay for the data at least for the data center backup, you only pay for the data that you're storing in the Druva cloud after it's been deduped. So however much you need to recover, there's no charges for that.
Excellent. And then Eddie's asking about encryption level. Can the data be encrypted once it's protected with Druva?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So the data is encrypted in flight using TLS 1.2. Then when it lands on S3, it's encrypted with AES 256. We use, in addition to that, we use a type of encryption on that. So we add another layer on top of that encryption, which really means that only you can access the data. So envelope encryption essentially is what we do on top of that. So again, that's part of what ensures that only the customer who logs into their console has sort of access to the key to get that data.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Well, Peter, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in our live Q&A session here, but I put a number of more technical questions for you there in the queue. Great presentation. Thank you again so much for being on.
Yeah, I'll get to the questions in the queue for those who stay on, just sort of as you move on to the next presentation. So I'll answer those in the background.
Excellent, thank you. And I encourage everyone to check out the handout that's there in your audience console as well. Druva's handout is entitled The Comprehensive Guide to Ransomware Protection and Recovery, so make sure that you check that one out. And I'll leave up the poll question while I announce our next Amazon $500 gift card winner. This Amazon $500 gift card is going to James Gillen from Michigan. Congratulations, James Gillen from Michigan. All right, and with that, it's time to introduce our next presenters on today's Megacast. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Gijsbert Janssen van Doorn, Chief Security Scientist at Zerto, and Mr. David Hines, Vice President of Technology at TierPoint. Gijsbert and David, are you there?
Yep, we're here.
Yes, I am.
Awesome.
Thank you, David.
Awesome. Thanks for being on. Take it away.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your wonderful introduction, David. So Today, David and I are going to talk about the economic impact of disaster recovery in the cloud. And it's going to be a little bit of a different approach than maybe some other sessions are, because we're trying to make it a little bit more interactive. So we're doing a Q&A approach. So we're going to talk and ask a few questions that we hear a lot in the market and that we get from our customers, and try to give the answers to it. And that will be both me and David answering. So who are we? So my name is Gijsbert Jansen van Doorn. I'm the Director of Technical Marketing at Zerto, although I would love to have a cool name like Security Scientist, or a cool title like Security Scientist, but I'm the Director of Technical Marketing at Zerto. And with me, I've got David, who is probably introducing himself right now.
Sure. Yeah, David Hines. I'm the Vice President of Product Technology here at SharePoint. So, responsible for working with our product leaders to develop new services that we can offer our customers, such as DRaaS as a service, which we'll talk about today.
Thank you very much, David. So let's talk a little bit about our agenda. What are we going to talk about? Now, I'm not going to go through all the questions, but what we're trying to cover is one, and hopefully you get the answer to these questions. So is cloud-based disaster recovery feasible for my organization? And where do I start? The other one is, how does cloud-based disaster recovery save me money? What are some of the different options that are available? And also, what steps do I need to take to learn more and convince others at my organization to move to cloud-based disaster recovery? So without further ado, let's start with that first question we get a lot and we hear a lot. And that question is, we have seen many organizations turning to cloud for DR, and the number is still rising. Can you give us some input around what is driving cloud adoption as an industry trend? Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to randomly quote an analyst with a number about what they see happening in the market. And what they say is that by 2023, at least 50% of the commodity server workloads that you're running on your own sites on-premises right now, that are now hosted in your own data center, will use a cloud for disaster recovery. So that's quite a big number. That's half of those workloads. And of course, there's a reason why they're doing that, because organizations are facing an accelerated or maybe even forced digital transformation, and they need to have 24/7 availability. But they still struggle with some challenges. They still have some challenges, and one of them is the influx of remote work and the need for resources and challenges to support all that influx. The continued security threats and the rise of security threats. We've seen trends in ransomware attacks where, especially now that COVID and that influx of remote work started, that they're specifically targeting those employees working remotely. The other one that keeps coming back, but it's data growth and sprawl from new environments, from new digital services, from new other initiatives that are being started because of that digital transformation. And of course, you still have to manage all of this with limited resources and limited access, which makes it very, very challenging. And that's part of the reason why people are looking at adopting cloud, but specifically look at adopting disaster recovery for cloud. Now on to the next question. So what are key signs an IT leader should look for when considering cloud-based DR? And I'll happily take that one as well. Because there are many things that we need to look at. And in our experience, we've seen some commonalities of organizations who have successfully transferred DR services into the cloud. And what these organizations tend to do is they experience growth and sprawl of their data. That's why they need some more centralized approach. They're trying to transition from a CapEx focus to an OpEx focus. They have a lot of digital initiatives. They're looking to meet and exceed their ambitious, we can say ambitious RTO and RPO requirements, but also meet those RPO and RTO requirements on a limited budget. And with limited resource allocation. So if an organization meets like one of these or some or maybe even all of these, they should definitely consider moving DR to the cloud. But there's another aspect as well, and that's security, because security is often overlooked, and because we need to create an air gap between production and the DR infrastructure. So if you manage both the infrastructures and they both use the same technology and they're both connected on the same networks, like unfortunately a lot of organizations still do, there's a risk of propagation of ransomware, for example. But with the right technology, with the right best practices, cloud DR can introduce this air gap and can be used as this last line of defense against these kinds of cyber attacks. So security shouldn't be overlooked. Ransomware is a thing that's real. It's happening on a daily basis. So we want to make sure that you are protected against it as well. And having an isolated environment somewhere in the cloud, an air gap environment, could definitely aid in your ability to cope with these ransomware attacks. Now, the next question that we hear a lot is, okay, what does an IT leader need to do to ensure that their data and applications are cloud ready? And what are some of the pitfalls they need to avoid? So let's look at those. I think one of the biggest considerations IT leaders should make when considering cloud is around compliance and regulation. So historically, this has been like a major blocker to cloud adoption in any form due to the fact that you're giving up some element of control. But however, the cloud platforms out there right now have adapted to this. And now most industries will be using the cloud in at least some way, shape, or form. Typically, most solutions will do the heavy lifting for you. So changing applications and data are often not required for the use case. However, what we do need to understand is our application dependencies. Recovering your application front end without a database, that would be not a lot of use. Also, a point I'd like to raise is that in the instance of cloud DR, often DR site will be based on a different platform to the source. So ensuring that any solution that you use to move that data to the cloud has built in an effective orchestration and automation to make sure that you are up and running as fast as possible. And you will definitely get the most out of that when you follow that strategy. One thing I'd like to add as well is data sovereignty. Usually we think about the public cloud as like the major cloud providers, Google, AWS, Azure, but there are a lot of local, more focused partners like TierPoint that offer DRaaS or VMware-based services, and an enterprise could remove any regulatory barrier by using such a local service provider. So that's definitely a point to take into consideration. It's also someone you can call, someone you can talk to, someone you can consult when you have questions. So we do see a rise in interest in the specific service providers that offer more locality and have great services nonetheless. So the next question would be, what are these different cloud models that are available, and why should an organization choose one over the other? And I would actually like to ask David to answer that question.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think, in this world we live in today, the great thing about the cloud is that there's a lot of options available to organizations. And I think in relation to the question you were just answering, there are a lot of different requirements that businesses will have when considering disaster recovery solutions, especially when you talk about the cloud. So as you can see from this slide, there's some great options out there. There's some that people are probably most familiar with: private cloud, a dedicated set of infrastructure, either owned and managed directly by the business organization and their IT team, or perhaps leveraging a provider such as TierPoint or another that can provide this private cloud resource. Those are great for companies that really have an IT group that is capable and has enough breadth in skill and really the time to focus on leveraging those resources to create a DR solution for their organization. Public cloud is a great target, as you can see here, for organizations, especially as they're along that journey in transformation. Perhaps they're not ready to move into the public cloud for workloads. They're not sure of costs. They're not sure of compliance. They're not sure of capability. But they can start to get a feel for, where these resources will work for them, while also providing some protection for those resources in the public cloud, and honestly often offers them an opportunity to make a migration to the cloud once they get that DR solution set up and tested. As these businesses evolve, you can see that there's also an evolution of the type of cloud platform available to them. So in cloud, for example, is, a company may have settled on a particular public cloud or service provider's cloud, and they become familiar with the capabilities and methods through which they manage their infrastructure and their systems. And so they look to leverage that expertise and leverage the services they've built around it within that technology stack, and simply take advantage of other regions where this cloud provider has resources and do what we call this in-cloud continuity or disaster recovery. The reality, though, I think where we're landing is that this is that multi-cloud world we all hear about and talk about regularly, is that organizations are going to leverage one or more of these types of platforms. Perhaps there is a small private cloud dedicated for some compliant financial type data or very sensitive data for the business that they want to have very tight control over, while many of their other resources may be in one or more public clouds that service those systems and applications the best. And the key is then, how do you manage all that? Well, this is where the last part of this slide, I think, is so relevant, is that oftentimes businesses have time, or limited time as it is, to invest in making their applications most efficient. I mean, information technology is hard. It's moving quickly. We're under a lot of pressure as technology professionals to keep up. Things like backup and disaster recovery and business continuity tend to take a back seat. And that's a very dangerous mindset to fall into. So disaster recovery as a service becomes a very important part of this overall ecosystem, regardless of where you look to target your DR solution, because it provides that assistance, that help, that best practice, and really even assurance through the process of not only implementing your disaster recovery plan and the technologies, but also helping you go through validation and testing throughout the process. And again, this is an area where TierPoint specifically has focused a lot of energy with Zerto and others to ensure that we can facilitate that implementation for our customers.
Thank you very much, David. And actually, I was paying some attention to the Q&A, and I see there's TierPoint customers on this session, and they're very happy. So that's definitely a good sign.
Yes.
So the next question is actually related to what you just talked about. So I think that's definitely one for you as well, David. So as we look at DR in the cloud and the models, do organizations actually have to pay for dedicated cloud space?
So that's a great question. And this honestly kind of sources from the original problem of disaster recovery. And I think we'll even talk about this a little more as we go through our presentation here, is that there's a lot of resistance financially to disaster recovery because of this idea, right? I have to have enough resources at a target location in order to spin up my applications that are critical to my business. And if I don't do that, when disaster strikes, how is the business going to be maintained, and what is the damage to the business in the long term? Again, the the beauty of cloud and how these various models have kind of become so relevant is that no, you actually don't have to, and have to being the key here, pay for all of these dedicated cloud resources and space. There are certain elements that you will need to pay for, generally speaking, target storage as an example. But when you talk about the compute resources to run these workloads, whatever they may be, depending on the type of model that you buy into, you oftentimes don't have to pay for those until you use them. So for example, with the public cloud, oftentimes you're paying some fee for the storage that would host the systems or applications or the data that you need to recover in the cloud, while the compute element, as I said, is paid for the time that you use it, be that testing perhaps, or when you're doing an actual recovery. In contrast, and there are gives and takes here, right? Puts and takes. So we have to balance that with sometimes you're not going to always have as much of the resource that you might want, right? So you can assume that these public cloud providers, for example, are going to oversubscribe those resources at some level. If that is a challenge for an organization, they may opt to do the private cloud model. So the private cloud model, because it is truly dedicated, means that you actually are paying for those resources even while the systems are not technically on, and you're simply replicating data, for example, from your production site to your DR site. Definitely there's additional cost to be had there, but there's also additional, assurance that when a disaster strikes, if it happens to, you're not going to be worried about, will my applications perform or be spun up and ready at the level and within the time that I require. And there's obviously some other considerations, as I mentioned before. It could be compliance and security that may drive you one direction or another. But the ultimate kind of outcome of this is that there is a lot of flexibility for organizations. And I think one really thing I'd like to drive home is it doesn't have to be all of one thing or another. You can, as I said before, have some portion dedicated and very strictly controlled, and yes, you're paying for, and then some that is maybe not as sensitive or as critical to your business, just paying for the storage that you need, but not paying for any of the compute or other resources until you actually use them.
Thank you very much, David. So as we are on the subject of cost, this question is related to it. What kind of process would an organization go through to decide if moving DR to the cloud would actually reduce cost? And I'll happily take this one. The key to understanding this is to have the right decision-making process in place. So the next step is then understanding the cost of any existing solution, or essentially the saving that could be achieved. And this could be anything from air conditioning cost in the data center to resource cost in actually maintaining it. Then we need to understand exactly how any new solution would utilize cloud and what those cloud costs would look like, as well as understanding management cost and what impact that is likely to have on the production, if any. And once all of these are understood, it's fairly straightforward to understand how much savings are to be made with any proposed solution. Now, COVID has changed a lot of the dynamics because, first of all, if you didn't have a DR plan in place, now you understand that a major crisis could stop your business. And if something goes wrong and you can't access your data center because of a lockdown, then how many days can you stay without providing any IT services to your organizations and your clients? And that's just one example. And if you already had a DR plan in place, well, the same concepts apply because there's also a new need for flexibility that wasn't there before. So things can change rapidly, and you need to adapt. And I think DR in the cloud enables you to do that quickly and at a lower cost than other solutions. So hopefully that guides you a little bit through the process that you can take. let's look at the next cost-related question. So what cost areas should organizations look at in the decision-making process? And I'll happily transfer that question to you, David.
Yeah, a great question. And this is one that really plays the most, I think, into the decision-making process when organizations are trying to decide, should we do this ourselves and try to take on all this effort, or go to a provider and ultimately get help, right, with an MSP. So the keys here are really what kind of things, as you said, would we have to address cost-wise when we're thinking about creating a DR site. And some of them are pretty obvious, right, that are beneficial when you move to the cloud versus building it yourself. Is really, facility. That's probably one of the biggest ones that is a long-term lease expense, circuit expenses, maintenance, power and cooling. All of these things, are handled obviously by a cloud provider without any need for you to deal with them. I mean, that's one of the major benefits of cloud in general, right? So that's a very important aspect. There's also the hardware costs. Again, going back to why a lot of times DR in general was challenging for organizations to invest in, is it was expensive. If I have very expensive systems running my production applications and housing my most critical data and assets, funding for systems at another location that are of sufficient scale that I can both replicate and recover at that target site can be somewhat of a daunting expense. I know a fallacy oftentimes that businesses may fall into is say, well, I'll refresh my hardware and my systems, and I'll take the old stuff and I'll move it to a DR site and I'll use that as my DR solution. And it seems to make sense, at least financially. I would argue, though, that businesses are going to put that hardware that they've identified that is no longer viable for their production needs would find it woefully unable to take on a DR event and continue to service their business in any material way, especially if it's a long time. And you mentioned the pandemic. I mean, here we are essentially almost a year into this. Obviously, it doesn't mean a data center may not be functioning, but it can indicate how long events can last and how organizations need to plan. So there's some other ones that are real clear along here too, that cloud providers provide some real value. The whole notion of maintaining licensing for software or systems or operating systems. The licensing can be somewhat complex and confusing. On-site for production is pretty straightforward, but when you're talking about disaster recovery sites, each vendor may have their own way of handling, is this production or is this disaster recovery or test or some other function, and what are the costs incurred by the business. So cloud providers tend to abstract that from you. It's included in the cost of their solutions, just like the facility and the hardware cost. And so again, it creates a greatly simplified model for you to manage with respect to building your backup site. And I think the last one that I think I'd focus on here the most at the end of this slide is IT administration. Anything you go and build has to have the level of attention to ensure that it is going to be available and successful when it's needed. Again, I would reiterate that a trap many organizations have fallen into in the past is that they build it, they kind of get through the process, and then even if they've had successful tests, it will drift and degrade over time. And it's because it's an enormous responsibility. And as we all know, we're all stretched very thin in the technology industry. So again, cloud providers take this burden of administration of much of the infrastructure and even some of the OS and software layer off the IT teams that are responsible for the continuity plan for their organization, and they can focus on what's important. What's important is the business applications and what's successfully driving their business forward. And again, this is where DRaaS as a service has become so prevalent, is that, not only can the cloud provider offer value, but an MSP like TierPoint can offer value because we can kind of take in some of that middle space where you're managing virtual machines and helping with the replication and ensuring testing is successful as businesses evolve in their DR solution.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, David. And that actually concludes our presentation or our Q&A session. And hopefully this was useful for you. Hopefully we've been able to show you some of the benefits in moving DR to the cloud, but also, so how do I get there? What works for my organization? What are my different options? I think when looking at it, infrastructure savings, time savings because of like improved operations and TCO are definitely some of the benefits of moving cloud to DR. Now I know that TierPoint offers DR as a service. Now I know they offer a lot more, so I'll give David a little bit of an opportunity to talk about the other solutions that TierPoint can offer as well in one of our last slides. So go ahead, David.
All right, thank you. Yes, well, as you can see from this slide, which I will not go through exhaustively because it is quite long here with the list, but we offer a lot of solutions. And why is that important? Well, with DR specifically, I think is most relevant in the sense that it encompasses all of the different technology elements and components that help a business be successful. And where TierPoint, I think, has a unique position in this industry is that because of the wide breadth of services that we can assess, help customers understand, and even transform to, be it cloud or some other, connectivity or network service or security, we can help build a full picture, not only of their production environment and help them better manage and transform those solutions, but also take advantage of that knowledge and capability to assess a customer's environment, go through some business continuity planning with the organization, and help them pick the right mix of solutions and services, both that we offer and that other providers offer, to build that cohesive, complete disaster recovery, business continuity service. So, again, a lot of different services available through our organization to help companies be more successful through technology and not spend all of their time trying to manage and navigate technology itself.
Excellent presentation, Gijsbert and David. Really appreciate that. I enjoyed the conversational style of that as well, taking common questions and answering them. And speaking of questions, we got a lot of great questions as well coming in from the audience. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll, and we'll leave that up while we do some Q&A. The question on the screen I want to call everyone's attention to is, what additional information would you like about the Zerto and TierPoint solution? And that's a multi-select question there. So let's see, Gijsbert, David, lots of good questions. First one that caught my mind here, or caught my eye here, is I think for you, Gijsbert, James is asking, does Zerto offer application-aware backup and recovery for specific types of applications?
Yes and no. So I'll answer it two ways. Yes, we do support and give you the ability to integrate with existing applications, one through the VSS framework, the other one is through existing frameworks like RMAN with Oracle and other ways of doing it, like quiescing DB2 databases, you name it. The reason I say no is because what we see and what we experience is that our replication method and how we protect applications is actually so good that you don't need to use all those application frameworks. You can use them as an additional layer of protection, but you don't need to because we're agnostic. So we can basically protect any type of application, whether it consists of one database, 3 different vendors of databases. So we really focus more on the application stack than specific components of the application.
Got it. Okay, excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. Next question, this one I believe is for you, David. They're asking if TierPoint helps customers with when it comes to disaster recovery, with a business impact analysis, things like that they would go through to kind of design their plan.
Yeah, we do. We do have a group that can engage with customers to not only assess technically their environment, which would be discovery of systems and data volume and change rates and so on, but also can engage with leadership or stakeholders within the business to actually look at what those applications are doing, assess what the RTO, RPOs should be, prioritization of those applications. So that is definitely a consultative type service, as you can saw from one of the previous slides there at the end, where they really sit down and go through a process of, like I said, engaging with those stakeholders, while they also have a technical team, as I said, that would engage in looking at the technical aspects of your environment and how the technologies that we employ and service on your behalf would facilitate that DR plan.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. And then for you, Heisberg, the question is around Zerto. Is there a trial or testing option that could be utilized to do a POC?
Absolutely. There's multiple ways. You can go to Zerto.com and find trial. But we also have hands-on labs available, free for anyone to use. So you don't need any infrastructure. You don't need any software to download anything. You can just request a hands-on labs and experience it for yourself.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time in our live Q&A, but I've put a number of more technical questions there for you in the queue. David and Heisberg, excellent presentations. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us.
For more information on TierPoint and Zerto, of course, check out the handouts tab there. It's there that you'll find a brief on the TierPoint solution, a fact sheet, actually, that talks about cloud-to-cloud recovery, disaster recovery as a service utilizing Zerto. So make sure that you check that out before you go. All right. Thank you for all the excellent questions. I'll just leave the poll question up while I announce our next two prize winners. We have another Amazon $500 gift card. This is going to Luis Vasquez from California. Congratulations. And our next grand prize for another DJI drone, this one's going to Joshua Schwertner from Oklahoma. Congratulations. I'll post the names there in the questions box as well. And with that, let's keep our Megacast rolling here. I'm excited now to introduce you to our next presenter. Welcome, Mr. Matt Wallace, CTO at Faction. Matt, are you there?
I am. Hey, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at.
Always great to have you, Matt. Take it away.
All right. Well, nice to see everybody today. Interesting topic here around data protection, DR, disaster recovery capabilities, whether you're kind of going from on-prem to the cloud, protecting workloads in the cloud, protecting workloads in between clouds. I've kind of seen it all over time, and it's interesting how many kind of different approaches there are, and we'll focus on some of the things, I guess, today that Faction does well. We're very focused on multi-cloud, but we have these incredibly deep chops around what we're capable of doing with VMware workloads historically. Also, as you can see, as an advanced consulting partner with Amazon and some other kind of cloud credibility, we've actually been dealing a lot with public cloud environments as well. As for myself, I've been around way too long now, doing all kinds of weird things everywhere from data center managed services to tons of software, and have had a lot of exposure to different types of DR scenarios, from everywhere from small scale, figuring out how to help less than 10 systems recover on a budget, to helping Fortune 100s figure out how to recover thousands of virtual machines that are mission critical. So I'm going to talk today about things in the context of two different types of scenarios here, one being data protection in the cloud and the other being data protection to the cloud. So data protection in the cloud, as people get more and more workloads that are running cloud natively, they're interested in a lot of things like backing up data, restoring data on demand, protecting it with low-cost storage. Obviously, we see lots of people doing things like backing up to a service provider's, cloud service provider's object storage and then tearing it down into some very low-cost archive tier. And then avoiding ransomware, and this is something that we see way more interest in as of late. It feels like ransomware is the thing that caused the industry to pay attention to security in many ways, because there's this like very consistent motivation to keep your systems protected and backed up and so on, because otherwise it much more is a matter of time than it used to be. Simply because there are so many bad actors who have turned this into just a blocking and tackling business. They get out there, they try to phish people, compromise credentials, get access to systems, and cause headaches for you and your enterprise. And the last being policy-based compliance. And this is things like we're working with enterprises where we see hard and fast requirements for things like data retention. And sometimes they find that difficult to deal with in the cloud, or especially in the multi-cloud. So some enterprises, they have some workloads in Amazon, some workloads, say, in Azure, or some workloads in GCP. We often see a kind of like, call it 70-25-5 thing going on for very large enterprises, where the vast majority of workloads are in one cloud, but there's usually a second cloud being used by some significant team, and then a smattering in other places. A lot of times what we see with those is they have retention requirements, sometimes driven by compliance, to retain data for a certain amount of time. And of course, most of the service providers have some ability to do write-only types of media, which is interesting. Like a good example here being, if you want to create buckets in S3, you can set policies that effectively make the data undeletable for some amount of time. Likewise, though, what we're finding is they really would rather have those things be central. So like one of the things we've been doing is dealing with the write-only media for doing data protection and retention for compliance reasons in a multi-cloud environment. So the other one obviously is data protection to the cloud. So, we see this really run the spectrum everywhere from endpoint protection, trying to save people from ransomware, and the cloud is the target, but they never expect the workload to run there. It's just a repository for data that can be pulled back because they want, say, low-cost object storage. Or we see people doing full DR and disaster recovery to the cloud, the other end of the spectrum, and then sort of things in between, like backup, but higher RTPO requirements where, yeah, they're going to be able to restore a workload to the cloud, but it's not going to be the fastest thing, but that's okay for the workload type. So it's all kinds of interesting things. And we've seen hybrid plays where we do see people who want to back up or do DR to the cloud, but they actually want to make use of that data. And that's one particular thing that I'm going to talk about a little bit more, because although it isn't specifically about backup and DR, it is about the fact that your applications have data that they need to run. And as we've seen data footprint grows, people who have footprints on-prem of data lakes, for example, that can grow into the petabytes of scale, and they have workloads that depend on that data, it's not just about backing up a container workload or a VM workload and being able to restore that into a cloud environment if they're running it in their own data center. They have to carry that large data set, that data lake along with it, or the application's effectively useless. And one of the things that we've noticed in the market is there's actually pretty good coverage, and you obviously see some of these people here on this Megacast talking about their DR products, their backup products that work really well for these use cases, and they all have their sort of different advantages. But one thing we don't see a lot of really good functionality for is people being able to deal with replicating and handling a second copy of petabyte scale data lakes at scale. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So just to cover it real quick, there's just so many ways where things can go wrong. And I think one of the areas we're seeing the most interest is around this idea of cyber recovery. And you might ask, well, what's the difference between cyber recovery and a backup and a DR? And I think one of the key things is that cyber recovery is specifically oriented around use cases to solve for protecting you or recovering you in scenarios where you're essentially victimized by some sort of bad actor from a network security hacking standpoint. So obviously there's many different ways that can happen. Early on in my career, I ran a large managed services team, grew to be 75 engineers. We had thousands of customers, and many thousands of devices. And the only time we were ever compromised in any way on our sort of command and control infrastructure was actually when one of the principal engineers had a roommate, and we gave all the principal engineers Spark stations they could keep in their houses for kind of doing off-hour maintenance and things. And we had a tool set that had to run on Solaris. But he gave his roommate an account, and it turned out, no one knew this at the time, but it turned out his roommate was secretly a completely infamous hacker at the time who went by the handle Fluffy Bunny and was compromising all kinds of high-profile websites. And so funny how that can happen. And that's only a sort of an insider threat, of course, because it wasn't really our engineer who was doing the hacking, which it can be some cases in enterprises, right, true insiders, but it was still a type of inside threat because that privilege, that escalation was only possible through an insider who was someone who was very close to a true insider. So that having been said, let me talk a little bit about what we're doing from our data protection product standpoint. So what we've done is we've worked with Dell, who is an investor in Faction, and also has partnered with us to deliver a lot of services through what's known as the Dell Technologies Cloud Storage for Multi-Cloud platform. And it encompasses many forms, right? So things like data lakes, which I'll talk about. But in this case, we've actually taken Dell's Power Protect, which a lot of folks will know as Dell Data Domain, and we've actually applied that to a multi-cloud environment or a single cloud environment. One of the interesting things about Faction is you have this ability to provision and re-provision network bandwidth between clouds as you see fit on our platform. We handle all the networking, so our services just attach to whatever cloud environments you want them to attach to, and you can do that through our portal. But the interesting thing, of course, is data domain is really well known in the industry because it gives you this ability to write tons of data, have incredibly high deduplication rates. So depends on what you're doing, but in scenarios where, for example, you're doing incremental full backups with relatively low change rates, and we've seen this with people who are, for example, using Oracle tools to dump a full database dump for a nightly backup, but the rate of change on the database isn't high. We've seen people get over 100-to-1 deduplication rates. So it provides, at that point, of course, incredible economics. Now it's interesting because there's, like I mentioned earlier, there's a worm mode, and it's pretty accessible because you can just leverage it like you would any other NFS endpoint, which of course the vast majority of the backup and recovery tools in the market support leveraging an NFS mount as their target. Now at the OS level though, what's interesting is the major operating systems have a driver for implementing what's called BoostFS. So DD Boost is the data domain protocol for writing into a data domain in a sort of more performant way, but it actually deduplicates before you send data. So this becomes incredibly powerful when you think about your goal of backing up a workload in the cloud and you are doing incrementals, but you have to send data to the other side before it even understands what's received. By leveraging this, you essentially avoid having to incur egress charges for all that extra data transmission. And the other nice thing, of course, is that you are separating the control plane of the actual place where you're landing storage from the actual CSP control plane. So, for example, ransomware now sometimes has the capability of attacking things and then looking for credentials that will allow it to manipulate your cloud property from the control plane. So, for example, deleting your backups from your S3 bucket. If you were backing up from an Amazon account, backing up your workloads into that same account or another account where it finds credentials, it can go and try to, some versions, of course, can go try to remove those backups in order to make you more dependent on paying them to unlock your data. So really powerful here, this just ability to kind of leverage this as this external repository attaches over our network connections directly into your cloud environment. And of course, if you also happen to leverage data domain in your on-premises environment, you can replicate that data into this platform, and that gives you an ability to recover in the cloud. You're backing up locally, you're doing data domain because it's powerful from its dedupe standpoint, very economical way to store data, really powerful, and then by sending the replicated copy to our service, it's available with sub-millisecond latency directly attached to multiple clouds. So interesting here, and I kind of mentioned this, so I won't belabor the point, but aside from the fact that we include this networking, this idea is if you're doing backups and you leverage multiple different cloud service providers by leveraging our service, which can attach the same storage, the same data domain instance, Power Protect instance, into multiple clouds, you're able to get dedupe across clouds, not just within the cloud, but your data that is in Amazon can be deduped from your data that is in Azure. And remember, as long as you're leveraging this BoostFS driver inside your operating system, it's being deduped before it gets sent across the wire. So really powerful there. I wanted to just highlight this, and I did mention it, but this is a screenshot of someone inside of our portal leveraging it to add an Azure link to their multi-cloud environment. So it's just really neat. We don't charge anything in terms of ingress or egress. Working with the CSPs, we've designed our architecture in a way that two of the major cloud providers of the four, and thinking now of Azure, and Oracle, we also have no egress charges, how we deliver the service. With Amazon and GCP, it's normal, but for people who have, for example, Amazon EDP agreements that reduce their egress charges, then your EDP agreement applies to the egress charges you would send to our service as well. Even though we're managing the networking, those egress charges accrue to your VPC, so your EDP still applies. Now, another important thing about the service, aside from being this fantastic backup target that can really enhance things from a cost optimization standpoint and provide incredible deduplication ratios, is that we are inherently multi-regional. And so, again, our fabric that comes with the service includes the ability to replicate between faction regions. So we have clients, for example, who back up workloads that are running in US East in Northern Virginia, and then we replicate that into Santa Clara so they can do a recovery in US West if they are so inclined or need to do that. So that's another powerful capability that's built into the service. And it's worth noting, too, that even if you were thinking, well, I don't want to back up out of the cloud because of egress charges, well, you know, to protect yourself from regional failure, which you really should be doing, you would actually have to back up and then replicate to another region. And very difficult from a CSP standpoint. You're typically going to pay some transit charges to do that replication. At the very least, just the egress charge, but you might also be paying for things like VPN gateways or just an upcharge for actual replication service. So a little tiny bit about network detail here, and I drew this specifically just so we could highlight a particular thing here, which is you'll notice this shows this entire faction operated environment in this lower level box, right? You see the connectivity to an on-premises environment, which is optional, but you might have that, and we support pretty much any method of connecting you want, whether it's terminating MPLS from your provider or EPL or EVPL hands-offs or private carrier lines or just VPN connectivity. And there's also this leg going off to the internet. But I want to highlight the fact here that with these connections into the cloud, those are faction managed. So you don't have to worry about setting up and managing Direct Connect or ExpressRoute or GCP interconnect in order for this to work. There's just a simple process of basically accepting a connection that our platform extends to you, and then you've got this leg off of this platform attached to your, say, VGW inside of AWS, and it becomes immediately accessible. And we advertise routes over BGP so you can see the storage platform. And we're actually compatible with whatever addresses you have. We have full flexibility on our platform, this sort of software-defined networking that lets us use pretty much any VLANs and any IP addresses for any customer. So that's pretty powerful as well in terms of flexibility. And so jumping past that, and this is all about really kind of leveraging that Power Protect service, the other thing I wanted to highlight is a way that folks are using us for these large data services. So we have a bunch of customers now who are leveraging Isilon or PowerScale, as some of the nodes are called now. We're running OneFS in their platforms on-prem. It's very, very popular for use cases that are really dependent on large data sets. So for example, we have an oil and gas company that does petrotechnical research where they have sonar scans they store in a data lake, typically in their on-prem environment. And they use those sonar scans in a neural net in order to analyze whether a particular area of a seafloor is worth doing some sort of more expensive petroleum discovery. And of course, you know, if you can use AI to eliminate the cost of drilling in a seafloor, you're doing everybody a lot of good, and it reduces costs enormously. Very valuable from an application standpoint. This is part of their estate, but several of their applications really require that data to even be functional. Now, they also leverage us for disaster recovery. They're using Factions cloud environments that are links to VMware Cloud at AWS to do DR. But rather than talking about DR, I just want to highlight the fact that regardless of where you do recovery, whether it's someplace like a VMC, VMware on Azure, one of the native environments in Amazon, Azure, Google, et cetera, Oracle, the thing is, if you have this large data lake, being able to replicate that data lake provides two advantages. Number one, you don't have to worry about some alternate method of restoring that data, which is a big deal because you want your applications to run the same way, use the same capabilities in order for your DR to be very smooth. But secondarily, of course, once you have replicated that data, even if the purpose of that secondary site is only for disaster recovery, you now have a full copy, and we can make that full copy available to workloads in native public cloud so that you can run other things off of that data without impacting the primary workload. So the petrotechnical company that I refer to, which is a Fortune 500 oil and gas firm, they are running big data analytics using cloud resources. So they can do things like turn up banks of spot instances to do processing for a time on that data, and it has no impact on the source data. So they get to kill two birds with one stone, building this hybridity where they've got a high-speed, low-latency link to this data, both on-prem, of course, because it's native, it's all in their data center, as well as in the cloud, because we have that 1 to 2 milliseconds at most attachment to the cloud for the secondary copy of data, and that's pretty powerful. So another funny thing about this, and just the whole file offering in general, which we call file scale out, aside from that compatibility with PowerScale or Isilon on-prem, is just the fact that when it comes to large file sets, we actually are the kind of best thing going in terms of attaching large file storage to the cloud. First of all, because of scale. We can scale up to hundreds of gigabits of connectivity. We can scale into at least, depending on which tier you're buying, because it comes in many performance tiers, at least 10 petabytes, but as much as 60 petabytes of footprint, all on literally one file system where you could mount that as one volume. We're releasing a white paper here coming up in just a couple of weeks where we talk about doing enormous genomic workloads at scale with this technology. But it's really powerful. And there are a lot of interesting offerings that kind of allow you to do file services, both in the cloud, and those are the ones where we've highlighted some of the pricing here that we compare against. But also there's third parties, for example, for other vendors that kind of provide either software-defined file capabilities or cloud-attached services like we do. The interesting thing, though, is that we scale much larger than these, right? So like one competitor I'm thinking of, they have 100 terabyte volume limits. Not at all useful when you're a customer like our petrotechnical company with 4.5 petabytes of sonar scans and other material that they need to replicate. It's not particularly useful for them to have to manage, 45 plus volumes and the resiliency and redundancy between those and the operational complexity of all of that. To say nothing of performance. So you look at things like Azure Files Premium, for example, and there's a performance limit that you can hit going into that. Depending on the mode you're using, EFS also can have significant performance limitations that we can actually outscale. And it's kind of interesting that the external connectivity for the CSPs actually tends to be one of the most scalable parts of their platform, but it is what it is. And of course, one of the things you're thinking about too is like, what do you do with this data? I mean, is there more to this idea and more to the value you have from making these copies than merely backing up? And like my example with this oil and gas company, there's a powerful set of services out there in multi-cloud. And I really, like to highlight this because one of the amazing things we see is that the CSPs are announcing interesting new services every day. And far from 5-7 years ago, when it seemed like every cloud provider announcement was merely more of the same, another instance, et cetera, I felt like it's interesting now to see things like SageMaker on Amazon, right? These announcements around SageMaker and reInvent. All these powerful capabilities for building and running data pipelines, integrating with Jupyter notebooks, all these interesting use cases. It's a very unique capability. You can't just pick up a workload that you designed to run on that and just move it to another cloud. And we've seen other scenarios too, where, for example, one of the CSPs, all of them have an image recognition service, and all of them can recognize people. But one of them is known for having a better facial recognition capability in that image recognition service. So if you want to do sentiment analysis and say, hey, is this person who's staring at my display window happy with what they see, or intrigued, or just bored, one of the CSP's image recognition services is better. And so you start thinking of these use cases where you have the same data, but you want to use it for different applications, different purposes. And it's one of those things that it's really powerful to have access to all these clouds with your data. And so I love that we have this service that gives you all these interesting capabilities, this massive deduplication, this multi-site replication, this ability to replicate and store all this file data at enormous scale. But on top of that, because we are literally enabling turnkey multi-cloud, where you get multi-cloud connectivity for that data without really having to do anything technically to design around it, you really unlock the possibilities of what you can do with your data in cloud services. So I think that's pretty interesting. With that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, great presentation, Matt. We do have some questions for you from the audience. So while we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll. And the poll says, what additional information would you like about the Faction solution? So a lot of good questions coming in. Matt, first one I wanted to ask you here, this comes from actually Matthew, who's asking, what kind of technology do you have around checking for data integrity, especially around ransomware, for example, just making sure the backups don't have ransomware in them?
Sure. So it's an interesting question. First of all, I'd say the service as it is does something really powerful in the sense that everything is incremental. And so you can have these incredibly long retention times. And so it's a little bit of an assurance because you don't have to be as aware because you're not overwriting data. And actually, one of the things that I love about our service, and I think matters to people, is that a lot of ransomware, when it tries to corrupt your data, it also tries to corrupt your backups or your retention, et cetera, et cetera. We actually had a customer of ours who, and we were offering a managed backup service as well, but they were doing their own backup with a major backup vendor's tool, and they were hit by ransomware. And unfortunately, the ransomware wiped out all of their backups as well because it had access to the volume. And when I first heard about it, I was like, oh no, how did this happen? Because I actually thought maybe they were leveraging our service, and not even supposed to be theoretically possible. And that was actually the sort of disappointment, was if they had leveraged our service, because it creates this sort of separation of responsibility in the control plane, and we don't actually provide them credentials that could go into the raw storage and encrypt those backups. It would have provided some extra resiliency for them. One of the things I like about this new generation that we're offering on this data domain platform is the fact that you can actually have these incredibly long retention periods. So we don't do today any sort of like malware scanning or things that look directly at the data to say, oh, is something going on in this? But it is nice that we have this cloud proximity too. So one of the things you can do is you, of course, even without kind of impacting your on-premises workloads, if you're backing up to this environment, you can obviously spin up instances in the cloud, tap into this data, and do things like test restores, and then just throw that away when you're done with it. And since our platform gives you that kind of on-demand network connectivity, and you can have whatever size pipe you need, whatever cloud, kind of carve up the included connectivity yourself, you have a lot of flexibility in kind of where and how you implement that.
Very nice. That's cool. And then next question comes from James. He's asking if you can give us some examples of file-based protection being used in the real world, and how does it interoperate with software for protecting VM workloads?
Sure. Well, okay, so imagine you have your VMware workload and your systems are going to be mounting data. And our system is inherently multi-protocol, and this is based on Dell's technology, right? But it supports NFS, CIFS, so Windows File Share, HDFS, that is the Hadoop protocol, as well as object storage, all for the same set of data, without extra copies, which is pretty neat. When you're replicating, of course, your workload's going to have some sort of endpoint it uses. It could be something like an HTTP endpoint if it's object protocol. It could be NFS mounts that you have on specific IPs. It could be CIFS. When I mentioned before that we have complete flexibility in positioning the network addresses, that's really important because, of course, if you have NAS systems or some other sort of a file-based system that's running on-prem, you might want to replicate the IP address scheme. So once we're replicating that data, literally when you're going to recover, obviously there's an operation typically if you want to write to that data to actually break the replication relationship and make the secondary copy read-write. But regardless, your workloads that are running on that target side, they are able to just use the same protocol endpoints, the same IP addresses to just mount up that data and leverage it in exactly the same way. So that's kind of powerful.
Very nice. Very nice. And so if folks want to get started with Faction and I mean, maybe they have DR challenges right now, what's the first step? How do you all, get started with those types of companies?
Well, I mean, I'd say, people reach out to us. It's sometimes through the website because Dell does so much because Faction is powering the Dell Tech Cloud platform. A lot of people contact and get in touch with us through their Dell representative. But usually there's something where we sit down, obviously try to understand the use case, and it works towards just a basic design. For some people, they want to kind of see it in action. There's a proof of concept. If you can obviously reach out to us through our website. We have both online kind of click-through demos that simulate some of the experience of our multi-cloud platform. We actually have a hands-on lab environment that you can turn up where you can actually log into a real version of Factions portal, log into real instances in multiple clouds. This is all like, self-resetting environment to actually dabble with multi-cloud and see what it's like to have multiple instances across two different clouds mounting the same storage and actually see that data interact in the middle, which is pretty fun.
Very cool. Yeah, sounds like some really cool options there to really see this technology in action. So again, great to have you on, Matt. Great presentation. I'm afraid we're out of time in our live Q&A, but I've put some more technical questions there for you in the queue. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you.
And thank you to Faction for For more information, check out the handout that's there in your audience console, and it's actually Matt's full slide deck is available there for download. So that's a great resource. Thank you to Matt for providing that. Make sure you download that before the event is over. And of course, visit factioninc.com for more information. And with that, it's time for our next grand prize and Amazon $500 gift card announcement. I'll just leave up the poll right there on the screen. If you haven't answered the poll, we appreciate you doing so. And our next Amazon $500 gift card goes out to Joe Murkowski from Wisconsin. Congratulations. And our next grand prize for a DJI drone goes to Alvin Ross from Nevada. Congratulations. One more gift card and one more drone still to give out on the Megacast today, so make sure that you stay tuned. And now I'm excited to introduce you to our next presenter on the Megacast. Welcome, Mr. Andrew Lorandos, Principal Solutions Engineer at Progress. Andrew, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So today I'm here to talk about really looking at our data within an organization as kind of a holistic view as far as how is this data being transmitted, do we have visibility behind it, and really being able to provide a solution for various services or individuals within the organization to communicate with one another with this data. And the data that we're talking about today is typically going to be regulated data. And whether we take that in the more traditional sense of regulation, where we're talking about PCI, HIPAA, or potentially even intellectual property, less traditional ways of regulated data, where we have protected information internally that we don't necessarily want to disseminate in various mechanisms. So that's really what the story is going to be about today, and about how we protect that data. So obviously this is taking place today, whether it is individuals or systems that are communicating, transmitting files between each other. But a lot of the time what we're seeing is that there's things out in the environment like traditional FTP or maybe legacy FTP systems. We're maybe automating this via home-built scripts, things like that. So when we're looking at data being transmitted in the organization today, we really want to see, is the data being encrypted in transit? Can somebody sniff this out in transit? We want to make sure that that's being protected through that tunnel. So things like traditional FTP is a pretty good example of where that could potentially take place. So basically determining, is that in our environment? Do we have regulatory requirements, or are we going to require administrators to have multi-factor authentication, or really any type of external authentication, whether we want somebody to be authenticated and authorized through an identity provider, that sort of thing. Single sign-on, obviously, is a conjunction of that. Now, as far as visibility, do we have records of these files being transmitted? Very typically, they are going to be files that are sensitive in nature. They are going to contain sensitive information. So we want to have a record of who originated the data, where did it go, who had access to it in the interim, and there's typically going to be a need to have that visibility. Obviously, if we are providing this service as something that a user would interact with, or even just other services are going to interact with it, we want to make it an easy-to-use platform. We don't want to be a point of friction in the environment. We want to make it so that users want to use this process, so that we have that visibility, we have the protection of the data. And then, of course, being able to consolidate various dispersed scripts is another very common scenario where we have these systems that were developed over time. Maybe individuals were responsible for them. They've since left the organization. We now don't have a change control as far as who's actually managing these processes or what are they doing. So being able to consolidate those and have the visibility on them is also going to be very key. Now, kind of elaborating on that ease of use topic is we are going to have users within an organization that need to transmit data, whether that's to other users internally, if that is to external parties. They're going to find a way of doing it. And very typically, they will go out and find really any solution that works for them. So things like Dropbox, Google Drive, where we don't necessarily have visibility as an organization to say, where did this data go? Who had access to it? So, these could even result in potentially public links, depending on what rights the user specifies when they're uploading it. Maybe they're uploading it to their own personal Google Drive, for example. We don't have that visibility and control of the data at that point, so it's now out in the wild, and we don't know. There's no real easy way to determine what happened to this data at that point. So this is really coming back to, we want to be able to provide a resource where users can interact with a web interface, for example, or maybe an Outlook plugin, that they're going to be able to facilitate this process so that we can really empower those users to transmit this data and obviously still have visibility on it. As part of that too, it really does boil back to the compliance aspect where this data is being transmitted ultimately. We need a way of transmitting it. But when an auditor comes in and wants to know where did this data go, how were the accounts created, what rights were assigned to them, there's not really a way to do that unless if we are providing this portal where users can actually interact with each other. Now, on the flip side of that, that's really the person-to-person aspect. If we're talking about the system-to-system, the dispersed scripts that are out in the environment today where we are, let's just say, generating a report on a system, we need that automatically transmitted to another location on a scheduled basis. This is really where I was mentioning these are processes that need to be developed over time, and changes can occur to that process if the individual responsible for these scripts leaves the organization. A lot of the time we just don't have visibility into what are these processes doing, where are these files going, if credentials need to be updated, how do we go about updating them, and we might not even know where the process is actually running from in some scenarios. So being able to consolidate those into a single resource is really going to be key as far as that change control process, being able to go in and see what files are transmitted from where. Do we have a layer of protection as far as disaster recovery and things like that, where scripts typically are not going to have that. Through the solution that I'm talking about today, which is Move It, there's actually no programming requirement needed to do this either. So a lot of the time what we've been seeing is that we can open this up more to the organizational units themselves to be able to handle their own processes, at least to a certain extent. And you can really control that on an individual basis based on their needs. But we can open it up to either create their own processes, define their own processes, or potentially even just go in and look at logging information as well. So being able to provide that visibility to those organizational units is pretty key. Now, as far as the Move It solution itself, there's really, and I've talked to them, a few scenarios that we're going to be going through. We obviously can go system to system with those automated scripts. We can have a system to person, person to system, vice versa. But we can also have the person-to-person scenario where we maybe do have individuals transmitting sensitive data, or maybe even very large files that just cannot go through our typical mail service. MoveIt would provide a solution for them while still providing the data protection and security. So managed file transfer as a whole, we're really talking about, again, just to reiterate, the ease of automating these processes. If files are being generated in a location, they need to go from point A to point B. We can easily define those. A scheduler is actually built into the solution, so we can manage all of that right from there as well. But being able to centrally manage those processes from those dispersed systems and have all of the visibility in a single pane of glass is really going to be the nice feature there. Obviously, the management portal is actually a web interface, so we can go in, manage that from anywhere, create new processes, what have you. Of course, we're going to require authentication for that, but that's something that is available. And then there's third-party integrations as well. So maybe we have a SSIS process that is kicking off and creating a package. We want to then tell MoveIt in this case that the file has been created, now go ahead and transfer it. So we have an audit log record of that. There's integration points through API, and we can call out to external processes using PowerShell, things like that as well. So those are going to be built in. Reports, again, really a key point when we're talking about sending this sensitive data and allowing those users to interact with one another. So again, no programming necessary for the automation. Existing scripts can actually be integrated in if necessary. So we maybe have some PowerShell scripts out there today, and we can take portions of that and pull it in if we needed to, maybe some file manipulation, things like that. But again, pretty straightforward. Now, when we are looking at MFT solutions as a whole or file transfer solutions, there's really kind of three buckets in my opinion. There's kind of the plain FTP or consumer level components where we're talking about just maybe even a Windows FTP server or something like that, where these files are not necessarily going to be encrypted at rest, maybe not even in transit in some cases if we're using just plain FTP, but ensuring that that data at rest, nobody can go in, pull those files out, manipulate them, access that data. We want them to authenticate and have an audit log record. So that's where, again, our visibility comes into play. A lot of the time, the plain FTP servers are really going to have just flat files to go through. We want to have integration with maybe a SIM of some sort to aggregate logs. Maybe we want to access a database directly to get that logging information out. But then there's additional processes to actually go ahead and deploy these services. Maybe we have one on each server in the organization. I mean, they could be just everywhere. So again, it's harder to actually control that data. A homegrown solution would be more of like those dispersed scripts that have been created. The personnel risk referenced here is really talking about if that person were to leave the organization, how do we update that process? Who has visibility on it? Obviously, there's no support other than the individual responsible for that. If they're out on vacation, it breaks. Now we don't know what's going on. No way to fix that. And two, we could be leveraging a lot of open source modules, which is not necessarily inherently an issue. It's just when we have to go through and iteratively update all of those modules and have that control take place on your own. That's where we potentially run into issues. Obviously, with MFT software as a whole, we typically want to look at right sizing. Can this solution scale? Can it meet our business continuity requirements or SLA requirements for these transactions occurring? Can we set it up and spin it up very quickly? And things that I've noticed in the environment for MFT is there may be a lot of kind of ad hoc licensing models. So you want to make sure that this solution meets your requirements today, and you're not going to have to keep going back to the well to get additional functionality as needed. We onboard a new partner, they're going to require, let's say, SFTP. We don't want to have to go back, get licensing for that, and have a hurdle to onboard that partner. So really, kind of boils down to what does MOVEit solve in this scenario? We talked a lot about how we want to have visibility into these processes, consolidate all of these processes into a single resource so we can gain that visibility. And MOVEit does that using really a few solutions. And we do that because we want to ensure that you're not having to deploy one with another one, anything like that. So we really break them out into, first and foremost, a MOVEit transfer server. And you can really think of this as kind of an FTP server on steroids. That one will actually be doing the encryption at rest. Users can, and services can connect to it and upload or download data from it. But we're, again, going to have a tamper-evident audit log there where we can have the level of visibility into who accessed the data. MOVEit automation, on the other hand, is really the workflow component. That's where we can come in, define data is being originated or being created in this directory. We want to monitor it for new files. Based on that logic, we can determine where that should be going. The MOVEit Gateway solution is really a architectural component, and that is very useful when we're running into specific regulatory compliance, specifically PCI, maybe sometimes HIPAA, where we cannot store any data in the DMZ, whether it is encrypted or not. So we can push that MOVEit transfer server internally and front end it with that gateway server. Now you might be saying, yeah, that's really great. We don't really deploy on-prem though. We prefer SaaS solutions or IaaS solutions. Well, if we are talking about IaaS, those first three, you can definitely deploy those in IaaS. That's not an issue. The MOVEit Cloud solution is really taking the MOVEit transfer functionality, so having users connect and upload, download data, and putting it in a SaaS solution. And that's very helpful in the sense that we can spin that up very quickly, get you onboarded, as well as you don't then have to manage infrastructure, administration of the service, health and maintenance of the service. That's all going to be taken care of for you, of course. So that's a really nice solution when it comes to that. But otherwise, yeah, so when we're talking about this solution, it is going to vary dramatically based on use case in your environment today, what you're seeing. So we're more than happy to talk about that workflow that you have today and see which components would fit the best. And that's definitely something that we would, again, be happy to do. So with that being said, I think we'll open it up for questions.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation. We do have some questions for you from the audience. While we do that, Andrew, I'm just going to bring up this poll question that says, what additional information would you like about the Progress software solution? And I encourage everyone to respond to that poll while we take your questions. So let's see, first question that came in, I wanted to ask you, Andrew, is about the licensing differences between MOVEit Cloud and on-prem. How does that compare?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So when we are talking about the on-prem, it is actually going to be a server-based license. So you would get a server license that has unlimited usage. You would be able to deploy as many user accounts, files, whatever you needed at that point. So that's server-based license. The cloud solution, the MOVEit Cloud, is more of a usage-based solution where it's either going to be licensed based on the number of users that we are interacting with. So it's typically going to be a lower cost to entry in that scenario, depending on user count, of course. Or we can actually do a bandwidth and storage model where depending on how much data is actually being transmitted, it may be more beneficial to do block storage licensing there. So there's quite a few different models, and like I mentioned before, depending on your use case, we would help you determine which one is really going to be the best one in that case.
Got it. Okay. And there's a question out here about if you use MoveIt in the cloud, who would pay for the ingress and egress? Is that just part of the package, or is that responsibility of the customer?
Right. So in the SaaS offering, that one is actually cooked into the licensing itself. That would be, so normally what it is if we're doing user-based licensing, it would be 5 gigs of bandwidth and storage per user per month. And that's a collective basis. So if we have, let's just say 25 users, and one user uses all of our storage and bandwidth, but the other ones don't use the resource at all, that would still be within the licensing aspect.
Got it. And there's a couple questions about, does MoveIt Cloud run on any cloud, for example, AWS, or does it run just in your cloud?
Right. So the MoveIt Cloud service does run in the MoveIt Cloud's environment, and we're deployed in Azure for the SaaS offering. Now, if you wanted to run this in your environment, you have a presence in AWS or Azure, you wanted to run it in your infrastructure there, we would typically go with the quote-unquote on-prem license or that server license, which you could deploy up there, absolutely.
Excellent. And then there's a question here from Michael about whether or not this could be used on open files such as databases.
So when we talk about databases, we can absolutely handle the flat files that would be output as part of the process for those databases. We're not going to have database connectors built in. However, based on your needs, you could actually create a custom script within, for example, MoveIt Automation, where it could run a process against the database server, have a flat file output, and then process or move that file based on that process being completed.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah. And then let's see, another question. What about deployment? How much effort is it to get this up and running?
Perfect, yeah. So the deployment for MoveIt, if we're talking about cloud, it's very quick to get that spun up. The MoveIt Cloud service, obviously that's a service that we have running out there, so we can get you spun up very quickly. If we're talking about the on-prem licensing or that server licensing, we actually distribute just as an installer. So you would really just have a VM deployed and run the installer, and the services would be up and running at that point. Now, that is getting up and running. That typically just takes a few minutes. After that point, that's where we would go into really the user administration, provisioning the accounts. And once you get familiar with the solution, it's pretty quick, but it is pretty relatively intuitive as far as where do I go to set up users, how do I set up folder structures, permissions, pretty intuitive. So the actual barrier to entry is very low. Of course, we do have things like professional services to assist with that if that would be desired, but pretty quick.
Excellent, excellent. And if folks are interested in this, trying it out, getting started, what do you recommend?
Absolutely, yeah. So I believe my slides are going to be included here as well, but on my last slide, we do actually have a link to the contact sales. It's typically the easiest way. You can also just go to ipswitch.com. It's going to be a pretty simple way to actually get in contact and maybe request a demonstration and an evaluation, get additional information, white papers, et cetera.
Excellent. All right, and I do notice there in the Handouts tab, the link for Progress Software takes you directly to the sign up to start a free trial of MoveIt Transfer. So I encourage everyone to check out that link in the Handouts tab before you go. And with that, I'm afraid we're out of time in our live Q&A, but it was a really great presentation. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to Progress Software and Ipswitch for supporting the event today. I'll leave up the poll question. I encourage everyone to answer before you go while I announce our final set of prize winners. We have an Amazon $500 gift card going to James Rechton from Texas. Congratulations, James Rechton from Texas. And our final DJI drone grand prize going to Eric Saltine from Wisconsin. Eric Saltine from Wisconsin. Congratulations to all the prize winners. I will post all of the names there in the questions box. Before you go, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to the 10 on Tech podcast over in the iTunes store. If you're out there and you are a potential sponsor of an upcoming Megacast or EcoCast event, I encourage you to check us out by emailing connect@actualtechmedia.com. And then finally, I hope that you'll join us for our upcoming summit event. This is our biggest event, one of our biggest events, I should say, of the year. And you can go to events.actualtechmedia.com to register for that, and you will be automatically redirected to our events website after the event. So, make sure that you register for that summit. It's going to be a huge event, so many expert presentations, so many awesome prizes. It's happening next week, so I hope to see you there. And with that, I want to thank everyone for being on the event today. I hope that you learned a lot. I know that I did. Have a great day. Bye-bye.